Welcome. You are listening to NightSleepWhisper. Tonight, we leave the noise of the world behind on the shore. Together, we are embarking on an epic 50-chapter journey, stretching from the deep seas to the infinite heavens. Captain Silas and his loyal ship, the Sea Serpent, are waiting for us. Now, lean back, gently close your eyes, and focus only on my voice. Let the whisper of the waves carry you to the most peaceful harbor of sleep. Our journey begins. Captain Silas sat at a small wooden table in a corner of the tavern. The room was dark and smelled like old wood and sea salt. Outside, the rain fell on the stone streets of the port. Silas did not look at the rain. He looked at a small, heavy box on the table. The box was very old. It had many scratches on its surface. Silas opened the box slowly. The hinges moved. Inside, there was a large iron key. The key was covered in red rust. It looked like it was under the water for many years. Silas picked up the key. It felt cold and heavy in his hand. He turned it over and saw small marks on the metal. There was a drawing of a small crown and a tiny wave. "That is a strange key, Captain," a voice said. Silas looked up. It was Thomas, the man who owned the tavern. Thomas was a tall man with a grey beard and kind eyes. He carried a clean cloth and a glass. He stood next to the table and looked at the rusty object. "I found it in a far-off land," Silas said. His voice was low and serious. "An old sailor gave it to me many months ago. He told me it opens a door to a great secret, but I do not know where the door is." Thomas cleaned the glass and frowned. "The Sea King's legend. I heard stories about a lost crown when I was a young man. Many sailors looked for it, but they never came back. They say the sea hides its treasures very well. It is a dangerous path." Silas rubbed the rust with his thumb. He did not feel afraid. He was a man of the sea. He lived for adventure and the wind in his sails. He was 40 years old, and he spent most of his life on a ship. "I am not like those other men, Thomas. I have a good ship and a strong heart. I want to see what this key opens." "You need more than a ship," Thomas whispered. He leaned closer to Silas. "A key without a map is just a piece of old iron. You cannot open a door if you cannot find it." Silas nodded. Thomas was right. He looked at the symbols on the key again. The crown was beautiful, even with the rust and the dirt. He knew a man in the city who sold old maps. The man was strange, but he was the best at finding lost places. "I will go to the map seller tomorrow morning," Silas decided. He put the key back into the wooden box. He closed the lid with a firm movement. The box made a solid sound as it shut. He finished his drink and stood up. He was a tall man with strong arms and a face marked by the sun and the wind. He put on his heavy leather coat. The tavern was quiet now. Most of the sailors were already asleep on their ships. Silas walked to the door and looked out at the dark harbor. His ship, the Sea Serpent, was there. It waited for him in the dark water. The wind was cold, but Silas felt warm with hope. He had the key. Now, he only needed to find the way. The adventure was finally starting. The next morning, the sun was bright. The rain from the night before was gone. The air was fresh and smelled like the sea. Silas walked through the busy streets of the port city. People were everywhere. Men carried heavy bags of grain. Women sold fresh fish in the market. Silas kept his hand on the wooden box inside his coat. He did not want anyone to see it. He turned into a narrow, quiet street. The buildings here were very old and leaned toward each other. At the end of the street, there was a small shop. Above the door, a wooden sign swung in the wind. It had a drawing of a globe and a feather pen. Silas pushed the door open. The shop was full of paper. There were maps on the walls, maps on the floor, and maps in tall wooden baskets. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and black ink. An old man sat behind a high desk. He wore small glasses on the end of his nose. This was Barnaby, the map seller. "Good morning," Silas said. Barnaby looked up from a large scroll. He squinted through his glasses. "Captain Silas, I have not seen you for 2 years. Are you looking for a map of the Northern Islands?" Silas shook his head. He walked to the desk and placed the wooden box on it. "I am looking for something much older. Barnaby, I have a key, but I need to find the lock." Silas opened the box. The rusty iron key lay on the red velvet inside. Barnaby leaned forward. He did not touch the key at first. He looked at the small marks of the crown and the wave. His face became very pale. He reached out with a shaking hand and picked up the key. "Where did you find this?" Barnaby whispered. His voice was full of surprise. "An old sailor gave it to me," Silas replied. "He said it belonged to the Sea King. Is the legend true?" Barnaby stood up and walked to a large cabinet at the back of the room. He used a small ladder to reach the top shelf. He pulled out a tube made of dark leather. It was covered in thick dust. He blew the dust away and returned to the desk. He opened the tube and pulled out a piece of very thin, yellow paper. "This is a map of the Forbidden Waters," Barnaby said. He spread the map on the desk. "Look here. In the center of the ocean, there is an island shaped like a dragon's tooth. My grandfather told me that the Sea King's treasure is hidden there, but no one can find the island without the key." Barnaby placed the rusty key on the map. The marks on the key matched a small drawing in the corner of the paper. Silas felt a spark of excitement in his chest. The map was real. "I will buy this map," Silas said. He took a heavy bag of gold coins from his belt and put it on the desk. Barnaby looked at the gold, then at Silas. "The gold is good, Silas. But be careful. This map leads to a dangerous place. Many men go there and never return." "I am a captain," Silas said firmly. "The sea is my home. I am not afraid of a legend." Silas rolled up the map and put it in his coat. He took the key and the box. He thanked the old man and walked out of the shop. He had the key and he had the map. Now, he needed a navigator who could read the stars. He knew exactly where to go. Silas walked down to the docks. The smell of salt and fish was very strong here. Many ships moved slowly in the water. He looked for a small house near the tall stone lighthouse. This was where Isabella lived. She was the best navigator in the city. She knew every star in the sky and every current in the sea. Isabella was sitting outside on a wooden bench. She was a tall woman with long, dark hair tied back. She wore a simple white shirt and brown trousers. She was busy cleaning a brass telescope with a soft cloth. She looked up when she heard Silas's boots on the stone path. "Captain Silas," she said with a small smile. "You look like a man with a secret. Are you here to ask me for a trip to the southern trade ports?" Silas sat on the bench next to her. He took out the leather tube and the rusty key. "No southern ports this time, Isabella. I found something much more important." He opened the map on his knees. Isabella leaned forward. Her eyes grew wide as she looked at the yellow paper. She saw the island shaped like a tooth and the ancient symbols of the Sea King. She touched the paper gently with her fingers. "This is a map of the Forbidden Waters," she whispered. "Many people say these islands do not exist. They say the maps are just stories for children. But this paper, it is very old. The ink is real. And I have the key," Silas said. He showed her the iron object. The map seller said this is the only way to find the island. But I cannot sail there alone. The currents are strange, and the stars are different in the forbidden waters. I need a navigator who is not afraid of ghosts or legends. Isabella looked at the sea. She loved the ocean, but she also knew its dangers. She was 35 years old and had spent 15 years on ships. She was smart and very brave. She knew that this journey could make them rich, or it could be their end. The forbidden waters are full of mist and sharp rocks. Isabella said, "The wind there changes direction every hour. It is a very difficult path." Silas. "I know." Silas replied, "That is why I am here. You are the only person I trust to lead the ship." Isabella looked at the key one more time. She saw the tiny crown on the metal. She felt a spark of curiosity. She wanted to see the island. She wanted to know if the legend of the Sea King was true. She stood up and held out her hand. "I will go with you, Captain," she said firmly. "But we need a very fast ship. The Royal Navy does not like pirates looking for lost crowns. If they see us, they will chase us." Silas shook her hand. He felt much better now. "I already have a plan for a ship. It is called the Sea Serpent. It is fast, and it is ready. We leave when the moon is full. Then we must prepare." Isabella said, "I will bring my books and my best compass. We have a long way to go." Silas and Isabella walked to a quiet part of the harbor. Here, the water was deep and the large buildings hid the ships from the main street. At the end of a long wooden pier, a ship sat quietly in the water. It was not the biggest ship in the port, but it was beautiful. It was made of dark, strong wood. Its 3 masts reached high into the blue sky. On the front of the ship, there was a wooden carving of a large snake with green eyes. "This is the Sea Serpent," Silas said. He looked at the ship with pride. "I bought it 5 years ago. It is very fast because the hull is narrow. It can sail through shallow water where big navy ships cannot go." Isabella walked onto the ship. The wooden deck was clean and smelled like pine oil. She walked to the back of the ship and touched the large wooden wheel. She looked at the compass fixed near the wheel. Then, she looked up at the ropes and the white sails. The sails were folded neatly. "She is a good ship, Silas," Isabella said. She sounded impressed. "The masts are strong, and the ropes are new. But we need to check everything. The forbidden waters have many storms. We cannot have a weak ship." For the next few hours, they worked hard. Silas went below the deck. He carried a small lantern. He looked at the wooden ribs of the ship. He searched for holes or soft wood. He used a heavy hammer to tap on the walls. The wood made a solid, healthy sound. There were no leaks. The ship was dry and safe. Isabella stayed on the deck. She checked the navigation table in the small cabin. She organized her maps and her tools. She looked at the stars in her books. She also checked the storage rooms. A long journey needed many things. We need fresh water, dried meat, and many bags of bread. Isabella said when Silas came back up. "We also need extra cloth for the sails and more rope. If a storm tears the sails, we must fix them quickly." "I have a list," Silas replied. "The men will bring the supplies tomorrow. I have 5 trusted sailors. They are strong men. They know how to fight, and they know how to work. They do not ask many questions." Isabella looked at the horizon. The sun was starting to go down. The sky was turning orange and purple. The Royal Navy has a station on the next island. She warned. "They watch for ships that leave the main trade routes. We must be very quiet when we leave. We cannot use many lights." Silas nodded. He felt the ship move gently under his feet. The Sea Serpent was like a living thing. It was ready for the ocean. He put his hand on the wooden rail. "We will leave at midnight tomorrow. The tide will be high, and the wind will be in our favor." They stood on the deck for a long time. They looked at the dark water and thought about the gold and the secrets waiting for them. The ship was ready. Now, they only needed the wind. The moon was high in the sky. It was midnight. The harbor was quiet. But Silas and his crew were very busy. They carried the last bags of food and barrels of water onto the Sea Serpent. Isabella stood on the deck. She checked the ropes and the sails one last time. Everyone was ready to leave the port. Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed on the stone street. Silas turned his head. He saw the yellow light of many torches. A group of men walked quickly toward the pier. They wore red coats and carried long muskets. These were the governor's soldiers. At the front of the group was a tall man with a sharp mustache. This was Captain Miller. Captain Silas. Miller shouted. His voice was loud and angry. "Stop what you are doing. You do not have permission to leave this harbor." Silas stepped to the edge of the pier. He kept his hand near his sword. "I am a free sailor. Miller. I do not need permission to sail the open sea." Miller laughed, but his eyes were cold. "The governor knows about the old map. He knows about the rusty key. He wants those items. They belong to the city, not to a pirate like you. Give them to me now, or my men will take them." Silas looked at Isabella. She was already near the ship's wheel. She looked worried but ready. Silas looked back at the soldiers. There were 10 of them. He only had 5 sailors on the deck. He had to act fast. "The map stays with me," Silas said firmly. "Seize him," Miller commanded. The soldiers ran forward. Silas pulled out his sword. The metal reflected the moonlight. One soldier tried to grab Silas's arm, but Silas pushed him away. 2 of his sailors jumped from the ship to the pier to help their captain. "Go to the ship," Silas yelled to his men. "Cut the ropes." There was a struggle on the pier. Swords hit each other. Silas blocked a blow from a soldier's weapon. He moved back toward the Sea Serpent. Isabella watched from the deck. She grabbed a heavy wooden pole and pushed a soldier away as he tried to climb the side of the ship. "Silas, jump!" Isabella cried. Silas turned and ran. He leaped from the wooden pier onto the deck of the ship. His boots hit the wood. His sailors followed him quickly. One sailor used a large axe to cut the thick ropes that held the ship to the dock. The Sea Serpent began to move away from the pier. Captain Miller reached the edge of the water. He was very angry. He raised his hand, and his soldiers pointed their muskets at the ship. "Fire!" Miller ordered. Bright flashes of light filled the dark night. Small holes appeared in the white sails, but the ship was moving fast. The wind caught the canvas, and the Sea Serpent pushed out into the deep water of the harbor. Silas stood at the back of the ship and watched the torches of the soldiers become smaller and smaller. They were safe, but the journey was only beginning. The Sea Serpent moved away from the lights of the city. The dark water of the harbor was calm, but the open sea was waiting. Captain Silas stood at the center of the deck. He looked up at the tall masts. The small holes from the soldiers' muskets were visible in the moonlight, but the sails were still strong. "Lower the sails," Silas shouted to his crew. The 5 sailors moved quickly. They were experienced men who knew their jobs well. They pulled on the thick, heavy ropes. The large white sails began to unfold like the wings of a giant bird. As the cloth opened, the wind caught it. The ship felt the power of the air and tilted slightly to one side. The sound of the wind filling the sails was like a deep, satisfied breath. Isabella stood at the wooden wheel. She felt the ship's vibration through her hands. She turned the wheel slowly, guiding the Sea Serpent toward the mouth of the harbor. Behind them, the port city was now just a collection of tiny yellow lights. The shouting of the soldiers was gone. Now, there was only the sound of the waves hitting the hull. The wind is coming from the east. Isabella called out. If we keep this speed, we will be in deep water before the sun rises. Silas walked over to her. He took a deep breath of the salty air. Good. The governor has fast ships, but they are heavy. They cannot follow us through the shallow reefs outside the bay. Once we reach the open ocean, we will be harder to find. One of the sailors, a man named Marco, came toward them. He was a broad man with many tattoos on his arms. The ship is holding well. Captain. No water in the lower decks. The wind is strong, and the crew is ready. Keep a sharp eye on the horizon. Marco. Silas ordered. The navy might have ships waiting outside the harbor. We must stay in the shadows of the cliffs. The ship glided past the tall stone lighthouse. The great light at the top turned in a circle, cutting through the darkness. Every time the light passed over the Sea Serpent, Silas felt a moment of tension. But the ship was dark and quiet. They moved past the rocks and finally felt the long, rolling waves of the deep sea. The Sea Serpent began to rise and fall with the rhythm of the ocean. The wood of the ship made low, groaning noises as it adjusted to the pressure of the water. This was the music of the sea. Silas felt a sense of peace. They were no longer trapped by walls or soldiers. They were free. Isabella looked at the stars above. She pointed to a bright blue star near the horizon. That is our guide. Silas, we follow the blue star. It will lead us toward the forbidden waters. Silas looked at the dark horizon. The journey was long, and the dangers were many, but the sails were full and the map was safe in his pocket. The adventure had truly begun. The morning sun was warm on the wooden deck of the Sea Serpent. The sky was a bright, clear blue, and the ocean looked like a giant mirror. The ship moved slowly because the wind was light. Silas stood near the front of the ship. He was watching the water and thinking about the long journey ahead. He felt the gentle movement of the waves under his boots. Suddenly, Marco shouted from the side of the ship, "Captain! There is something in the water." Silas walked over to Marco. The sailor was pointing at a small, shiny object floating on the surface of the sea. It was bobbing up and down in the wake of the ship. It looked like a piece of glass. "Get the net," Silas ordered. "Let's see what it is." Marco and another sailor, a man named Leo, worked together. They dropped a long net into the water. It took a few minutes, but they finally caught the object. When they pulled it onto the deck, Silas saw it was a green glass bottle. The glass was very thick and covered in white salt and small green plants from the ocean. Isabella joined them. She looked at the bottle with curiosity. "It is sealed with heavy wax," she noted. Someone wanted the contents to stay dry for a very long time. Silas took a small knife from his belt. He carefully scraped the red wax away from the top of the bottle. He pulled out a piece of cork. There was no noise, only the smell of old air. He turned the bottle upside down, and a small, rolled piece of yellow paper fell into his hand. The paper was dry, but it was very thin. Silas opened it slowly so it would not break. The message was written in dark red ink. The handwriting was messy and looked like it was written in a hurry. "What does it say?" Isabella asked. She leaned closer to read the words. Silas read the note aloud. "To the person who finds this, turn back now. The forbidden waters are not for the living. The Sea King protects his crown with more than just rocks and wind. Beware the teeth of the sea. The king does not want visitors." The crew was quiet for a moment. A cold feeling moved through the air, despite the warm sun. Marco looked at the open ocean and then back at the captain. "It is a warning, Captain. Maybe the legends are more dangerous than we thought." Silas looked at the paper and then at the rusty key in his pocket. He did not look afraid. Instead, he looked more determined. Many people try to stop others from finding treasure by using fear. Silas said, "This message is old. It could be 100 years old. We have a fast ship and a good navigator. We are not turning back." Isabella nodded, but her eyes were serious. The teeth of the sea probably means the sharp rocks around the tooth-shaped island. We must be very careful when we get closer. Silas threw the empty green bottle back into the ocean. It disappeared under the blue waves. "Keep the ship on course," he commanded. "We have a crown to find." The sky became very dark in the evening. The bright blue color of the ocean disappeared. Now, the water looked like black ink. Large, heavy clouds covered the moon and the stars. Silas stood on the deck and felt the wind change. It was no longer a gentle breeze. It was cold and very strong. He knew a big storm was coming. "Prepare the ship," Silas shouted to his crew. "Lower the small sails. Tighten the ropes." The crew moved fast. Marco and Leo ran across the deck. They pulled on the heavy ropes with all their strength. Their muscles were tight, and their faces were wet with sweat. The wind began to howl through the wooden masts. Silas felt the Sea Serpent rise high into the air as a giant wave moved under the hull. Then, the ship dropped down quickly. Isabella was at the wheel. She planted her feet wide on the wooden deck to stay balanced. She held the wheel with both hands. The wood groaned as she turned it against the power of the water. A giant wave hit the side of the ship. A huge wall of cold, salty water splashed across the deck. Everyone was suddenly very wet. "Hold on," Isabella yelled. Her voice was almost lost in the noise of the wind. The rain started to fall. It was not a light rain. It felt like small stones hitting their skin. Silas grabbed a thick rope to stay on his feet. He looked at his men. They were tired, but they did not stop working. They knew that if they stopped, the ship could flip over in the deep water. "Marco, help Leo with the main rope," Silas commanded. He ran toward them to help. The three men pulled together. They worked as one. Slowly, they managed to secure the heavy cloth. The ship was easier to control now, but the waves were still like mountains of water. For many hours, the crew fought the ocean. The darkness was total. They could only see when the lightning lit up the sky for a second. The sound of the thunder was like a heavy drum in their chests. The ship moved up and down, left and right. Silas felt a moment of fear, but he looked at the iron key in his pocket. He remembered the treasure. He remembered his goal. Finally, after a long time, the wind started to slow down. The rain became light. The giant waves became smaller. The sky in the east started to turn a soft gray color. The sun was coming up. The crew was exhausted. They sat on the wet deck and breathed deeply. They were covered in salt and tired to their bones. But the Sea Serpent was still floating. They survived the night. The sun was high in the sky when the lookout shouted from the top of the mast. Silas and Isabella ran to the front of the ship. In the distance, the blue water changed color. It was no longer a deep, dark blue. It was a pale, dangerous green. Rising out of the water were hundreds of sharp, black rocks. They looked like the broken teeth of a giant animal. The teeth of the sea. Isabella whispered. She held her navigation book tightly. The map was correct. We are very close to the forbidden waters. Silas looked at the rocks. They were everywhere. Some were tall and easy to see. Others were hidden just under the surface of the waves. The white foam of the ocean jumped high into the air as the water hit the stone. The sound of the waves hitting the rocks was like a constant, low growl. It was a place where many ships went to die. "We cannot go through with the sails full," Silas said. He turned to his men. "Lower the sails halfway. Marco, go to the front with a long pole. You must watch the water for hidden rocks." The crew moved with care. They were still tired from the storm, but they knew this was a different kind of danger. The Sea Serpent slowed down. Isabella took the wheel. Her face was very serious. She looked at the rocks and then at the sky. She was looking for a path through the maze of stone. "Left. Turn left." Marco shouted from the front. He pushed his long wooden pole into the water to check the depth. Isabella turned the wheel slowly. The ship moved through a narrow gap between two tall rocks. The dark stone was so close that Silas could reach out and touch it. He could see the small crabs and green plants growing on the side of the rocks. The ship made a soft, scraping sound as it brushed against some seaweed. "Now right." Marco called out again. The ship turned again. It was a slow and difficult dance. The wind was light, which was good, but the currents under the water were strong. The water tried to push the Sea Serpent against the sharp edges of the island. Silas stood next to Isabella. He did not speak. He did not want to distract her. He could see the sweat on her forehead. For 2 hours, they moved through the field of rocks. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, the rocks began to disappear. The water became deep and blue again. Ahead of them, a large island rose from the sea. It was tall and shaped like a single, sharp tooth. "We did it," Isabella said. She let out a long breath and wiped her face. "We are through the teeth." Silas looked at the Tooth Island. It was green with trees at the bottom, but the top was grey stone. It looked lonely and mysterious. "The map says the cave is on the western side," Silas said. "But we must be careful. If we can get through, other people can too." He looked back at the rocks. They were a wall between the ship and the rest of the world. They were officially in the forbidden waters. The Sea Serpent moved slowly along the coast of the tooth-shaped island. The giant mountain of stone rose high above them. The green trees at the bottom were thick and dark. Silas stood next to Isabella at the wheel. He held the old map in his hands. The map showed a small drawing of a cave on the western side of the island. "We need to find the exact spot," Silas said. "The map says the cave is near a large black rock shaped like a hand." Isabella looked at the small brass compass on the ship's wheel. Her face suddenly looked very worried. She tapped the glass of the compass with her finger. The thin metal needle inside did not point north. Instead, it began to spin in circles. It moved fast, then slow, then fast again. "Silas, look at this," Isabella whispered. Silas leaned over to see. "Why is it spinning? Are we moving in a circle?" Isabella shook her head. "No, the ship is moving straight. I think the rocks on this island are strange. They have a power that pulls on the metal. The compass is broken. It is useless here." This was bad news. Without a compass, it was very hard to know which way was west. The sun was high in the sky, so they could guess the direction, but the coast was full of small bays and hidden corners. If they went the wrong way, they might hit the sharp rocks again. "The crew is getting nervous," Marco said, walking toward them. He looked at the spinning needle and frowned. A ship without a compass is like a bird without eyes. The men are talking about the message in the bottle. They think the Sea King is playing tricks on us. "Tell the men to stay quiet," Silas ordered. His voice was strong and calm. We do not need a needle to tell us where we are. We have eyes. We have the sun. And we have the map. Silas looked at the island. He saw a tall waterfall falling from a high cliff. He looked at the map again. Isabella, look. There is a waterfall on the map. If the waterfall is there, then the hand rock must be further down the coast to the right. Isabella looked at the map and then at the trees. She felt a bit better. You are right, Captain. We must trust our eyes now. They sailed slowly. Every man on the ship was looking at the shore. They saw strange birds with bright red feathers flying above the trees. The air was hot and heavy. The sound of the ocean hitting the sand was the only noise. After an hour of searching, Leo shouted from the front of the ship, "I see it. Look at the beach." Silas and Isabella looked where he was pointing. Near the water, there was a giant, dark rock. It had 5 long pieces of stone pointing at the sky. It looked exactly like a giant hand reaching out of the earth. "That is it," Silas said. He felt a surge of excitement. The hand rock. The cave must be behind it. They dropped the anchor into the clear water. The heavy metal hit the sand under the waves. The Sea Serpent stopped moving. They were finally at the right place, even without a compass. The Sea Serpent sat quietly in the calm water of the bay. Silas and Isabella looked at the hand rock from the deck. The sun was starting to move down in the sky. The waves were hitting the base of the giant stone hand, covering the bottom of the rocks with white foam. Silas knew they had to move quickly, but he also knew they had to wait for the right moment. The map says the door only appears when the sea goes away, Silas said. He looked at the waterline on the dark rocks. The tide is still too high. We must wait for the low tide. Then we should prepare the small boat. Isabella suggested. We can row to the beach and wait there. We do not want to waste any time when the entrance opens. Silas agreed. He called Marco and Leo. Together, they lowered a small wooden boat into the water. Silas put his heavy leather bag in the boat. Inside the bag were the rusty key, some candles, a flint to make fire, and 2 sharp swords. He and Isabella climbed down into the small boat. The wood moved gently under their weight. Silas took the oars. He pulled back, and the boat moved toward the sandy beach. The water was so clear that he could see colorful fish and white shells on the bottom of the sea. They reached the sand and pulled the boat high up so the waves would not take it away. The beach was beautiful but very quiet. There were no animals, only the sound of the wind in the palm trees. They walked toward the hand rock. Up close, the rock was even larger. It looked like a giant buried under the sand was trying to reach for the sky. Look. Isabella pointed. The water is moving back. As the minutes passed, the ocean began to pull away from the shore. The wet sand sparkled in the afternoon sun. Slowly, a dark space appeared at the bottom of the hand rock. At first, it was just a small hole filled with water, but as the tide went lower, the hole became a tall, narrow door. It was a cave entrance that was hidden under the sea for half of the day. The hidden cave. Silas whispered. He felt a mix of excitement and mystery. The Sea King was very clever. No one can find this place unless they know the secret of the tide. They walked to the entrance. The air coming from inside the cave was cold and smelled like wet stone and very old things. Silas took a candle from his bag and lit it. The small yellow flame danced in the dark. He held it high. The walls of the cave were smooth and covered in green moss. "Is the key ready?" Isabella asked. She looked into the darkness. She was brave, but she held the handle of her sword tightly. "It is here," Silas said, touching his pocket. "Let's see what is inside." They stepped into the cave. Their boots made soft sounds on the wet floor. The light of the candle did not go very far, and the shadows on the walls looked like dancing ghosts. They walked deeper and deeper into the mountain. The sound of the ocean outside became a soft whisper. They were now inside the heart of the island, looking for a treasure from a lost time. The air inside the cave was very quiet. Silas held the candle in front of him. The light was small, but it helped them see the path. The floor was now dry sand instead of wet rocks. Isabella walked behind him. She looked at the walls. There were old drawings of fish and ships on the stone. Someone was here a long time ago. Isabella said. Her voice was a soft whisper that traveled through the dark. They walked for 5 more minutes. Suddenly, the narrow path opened into a very large room. The ceiling was so high that Silas could not see the top. In the center of the room, something was shining. It was a bright, yellow light. Look there. Isabella pointed. They walked closer. Silas held his candle higher. They both stopped and stared in surprise. Standing on a stone tall base was a giant statue. It was made of solid gold. The statue looked like a powerful man with a long beard. He wore a crown that looked like waves of the ocean. This was the Sea King. The statue was beautiful. The gold sparkled even in the weak light of the candle. The king had a serious face and eyes made of blue stones. In his left hand, he held a large shield. The shield was not gold. It was made of bright, polished silver. It had many drawings and symbols on it. He looks like he is watching us. Isabella whispered. She felt a little nervous. The statue was very big and very old. Silas walked around the base of the statue. He looked at the king's right hand. The hand was closed into a fist, but there was a small hole in the center. Silas took the rusty iron key out of his pocket. He looked at the key and then at the golden fist. I think the key goes here, Silas said. He climbed onto the stone base. He was careful not to fall. He reached up and put the rusty key into the hole in the golden hand. The key fit perfectly. Silas turned the key slowly. He did not hear a click, but he felt the metal move inside the statue. Suddenly, the silver shield in the king's other hand moved. It made a low, grinding sound as it shifted. A small door opened at the bottom of the statue's base. Inside the door, there was a small wooden box covered in dust. We found it, Silas said. He stepped down and picked up the box. Is the crown inside? Isabella asked. She looked at the box with excitement. Silas opened the lid. There was no crown. Instead, there was a piece of white stone with more symbols on it. There was also a message written on a piece of old leather. It is not the crown, Silas explained. He looked at the silver shield on the statue. But the shield is important. Look at the drawings. It shows a mountain with fire at the top. It shows a volcano. The volcano on the next island. Isabella realized. The crown is not here. This statue is just a guide. We must take the shield and the stone. Silas looked at the Golden King one last time. They had the next clue. But the journey was getting more difficult. They needed to take the heavy shield and find their way back to the ship before the tide came back in. Silas and Isabella walked out of the cave. The silver shield was very heavy, so they carried it together. The sun was lower in the sky now, and the light was a deep orange. The air on the beach was still hot. They walked quickly across the sand toward their small boat. Silas wanted to get back to the Sea Serpent before the sun disappeared completely. Suddenly, Isabella stopped. She looked at the water and her face became pale. Silas, look at the bay. That is not our ship. Silas looked past the hand rock. The Sea Serpent was still there, but another ship was now sitting next to it. This new ship was larger and painted entirely black. It had dark red sails and a flag with a white skull. It was the Shadow, a ship known for trouble. A group of men stood on the beach near Silas's small boat. In the middle of the men stood a very tall man. He wore a long black coat and a hat with a red feather. He had a long, thin scar on his cheek and eyes as cold as ice. This was Captain Vane, a pirate who was famous for being greedy and cruel. "Captain Silas," Vane said. His voice was like the sound of dry leaves on the ground. "I followed you from the port. I knew you had a secret map. It looks like you found something very beautiful." Vane looked at the silver shield in their hands. His eyes sparkled with greed. He did not care about the history of the Sea King. He only cared about the value of the metal. "This does not belong to you, Vane," Silas said. He stepped in front of Isabella to protect her. He put his hand on the handle of his sword. "This is a piece of history. It belongs to the sea." Vane laughed, and his men laughed with him. There were at least 10 pirates on the beach. They all carried swords and pistols. Silas only had Isabella and his own sword. The situation was very dangerous. "Everything in these waters belongs to me if I want it," Vane said. He took a step forward. "Give me the shield and the box. If you give them to me now, I will let you and the woman live. If you refuse, my men will take them from your cold hands." Isabella gripped the silver shield tightly. She looked at the Sea Serpent. She could see Marco and Leo on the deck of their ship. They were pointing their muskets at Vane's ship, but they were too far away to help on the beach. "We are not giving you anything," Isabella said bravely. Her voice did not shake. Vane's smile disappeared. He pulled out a long, shiny sword. The metal left the scabbard. "I hoped you would say that," Vane whispered. "I enjoy a good fight." Silas pulled out his own sword. He felt the weight of the metal in his hand. He knew he had to be smart. He could not fight 10 men at once. He looked at the hand rock and then at the dark entrance of the cave behind them. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Captain Vane moved like a hungry wolf. He ran across the sand and swung his sword toward Silas's head. Silas raised his own blade just in time. The two pieces of metal met with a loud, sharp ring that echoed off the high stone walls of the hand rock. The force of the blow was strong, and Silas felt the vibration go all the way down his arm to his shoulder. "You are old and slow, Silas," Vane shouted. He pushed forward, forcing Silas to step back into the soft sand. "I am experienced, Vane," Silas replied. He gritted his teeth and pushed back with all his strength. "There is a difference." Vane's pirates did not join the fight yet. They stood in a circle, laughing and watching the two captains. They enjoyed the show. Isabella stood near the entrance of the cave, holding the heavy silver shield. She looked for a way to help, but the pirates were between her and the small boat. The duel continued. Vane was fast. He moved his sword in quick circles, attacking from the left and then the right. Silas stayed calm. He did not move more than he needed to. He watched Vane's eyes and his feet. Every time Vane attacked, Silas blocked the blade. The sound of metal hitting metal was constant. Small sparks flew into the air as the swords scraped against each other. Suddenly, Vane kicked a cloud of sand into Silas's face. Silas blinked and moved his head, but he was blinded for a second. Vane saw his chance and lunged forward. The point of his sword cut through Silas's leather coat, leaving a small red mark on his arm. "Silas!" Isabella cried out. She dropped the shield and grabbed a heavy piece of driftwood from the beach. Silas ignored the pain in his arm. He felt a surge of energy. As Vane moved in for a final blow, Silas dropped to one knee. He swung his leg in a wide circle, hitting Vane's ankles. The tall pirate lost his balance and fell onto the wet sand. Silas stood up quickly and pointed his sword at Vane's throat. "The fight is over, Vane. Tell your men to step back." Vane lay on the ground, breathing hard. His hat was gone, and his face was covered in sand. He looked up at Silas with pure hatred. But he was also a smart man. He knew he was in a bad position. He raised his hand, and his pirates stopped laughing. They reached for their pistols. "You think you won?" Vane whispered. "Look at the water, Silas." Silas glanced toward the ocean. The tide was coming back in very fast. The entrance to the cave was already halfway covered in water again. More importantly, Vane's ship, the Shadow, was moving closer to the shore. They were preparing to fire their large cannons at the Sea Serpent. "Isabella, the shield. Now!" Silas yelled. Isabella grabbed the silver shield and ran toward Silas. The pirates tried to stop her, but Silas swung his sword in a wide arc to keep them away. They reached their small boat just as a large wave hit the shore. The sand was becoming a muddy mess. They pushed the boat into the water. Silas jumped in and grabbed the oars. He pulled with everything he had. Vane stood up on the beach and screamed at his men to fire. But the boat was already bobbing in the waves. They were moving, but the danger was far from over. Silas pulled the heavy wooden oars with all his strength. His muscles burned, and his breath was short. Isabella sat at the back of the small boat, holding the silver shield against her chest. Behind them, the beach was getting smaller. Captain Vane stood on the sand, waving his sword and shouting at his pirates. Suddenly, a bright flash of light came from the side of the black ship, the Shadow. A second later, a loud explosion shook the air. A heavy iron ball hit the water only a few meters away from Silas's small boat. A giant wall of cold sea water rose into the air and fell on them, soaking their clothes. "They are using the cannons," Isabella yelled. She looked back at their own ship. "Marco! Leo! Be ready!" On the deck of the Sea Serpent, the crew was moving fast. They saw the danger. Marco stood at the side of the ship and threw a thick rope into the water. Silas steered the small boat toward the rope. Another cannon fired from the Shadow. This time, the iron ball flew over their heads and hit a tall rock. Pieces of rock fell into the sea like rain. "Grab the rope!" Silas shouted to Isabella. Isabella reached out and caught the wet rope. Marco and Leo began to pull. They pulled the small boat close to the side of the Sea Serpent. Silas stood up, grabbed the wooden ladder, and climbed quickly. Isabella followed him, still holding the silver shield. Once they were on the deck, the sailors quickly pulled the small boat up and out of the water. "Get us out of here," Silas commanded. "Raise the anchor. Now!" The crew worked together. The heavy metal anchor came up from the sandy bottom. The sails of the Sea Serpent were already open, catching the afternoon wind. The ship began to move, turning away from the island and the black ship. Captain Vane's ship was also moving. The Shadow was larger and had more cannons, but the Sea Serpent was faster and lighter. Silas took the wheel from Isabella. He knew these waters better than Vane. He looked at the field of sharp rocks, the teeth of the sea, that they passed earlier. "We are going back into the rocks," Silas said. His eyes were narrow and focused. "But Silas, that is dangerous," Leo cried out. "The tide is coming in. The currents will be very strong. Vane's ship is too big for the narrow paths," Silas explained. "If he follows us, he will hit the rocks and sink. If he doesn't follow us, we escape." The Sea Serpent entered the maze of black stone. The water was moving fast, spinning in small circles near the rocks. Silas turned the wheel left and right. He felt the power of the ocean in his hands. Behind them, the Shadow slowed down. Vane realized the trap. He did not want to break his ship on the sharp stones. The black ship fired one last cannon, but the ball hit a large rock and did no damage. The Sea Serpent glided through a narrow gap and reached the deep, blue water on the other side. They were safe for now. The island and Vane's ship disappeared behind the wall of stone. The night was very quiet. The Sea Serpent moved smoothly on the dark, flat water. Captain Silas sat in his small cabin with Isabella. The silver shield lay on the wooden table between them. It looked like a second moon inside the room. They were looking at the drawings of the volcano and the strange symbols. "How did Vane find us so quickly?" Silas asked. He rubbed his tired eyes. "The ocean is very big. We were hidden by the mist and the dangerous rocks. It is almost impossible to follow a ship through the teeth of the sea." Isabella looked at the shield. Her face was full of worry. "I do not know, Silas. Maybe he is a very lucky man. Or maybe he has a secret map of his own." Silas shook his head slowly. "No. He was waiting for us at the Hand Rock. He knew exactly where we were going. I think someone on this ship is telling him our secrets. I think we have a traitor among us." Isabella felt a cold chill in her heart. She looked at the closed cabin door. "A traitor. But we know these men. Marco and Leo have been with us for many years. They are like family. I want to believe in our crew, too," Silas said. His voice was a low whisper. "But I must be sure. I cannot risk the ship or the lives of my people." Silas stood up and walked out onto the dark deck. The sailors were mostly sleeping, except for the man at the wheel. Silas walked quietly, his boots making no sound on the wood. He moved to the back of the ship where the shadows were deepest. Suddenly, he saw a small, bright light. It was not a star, and it was not the moon. It was a quick flash of light from a small mirror. Someone was standing near the ropes, holding a piece of glass toward the dark horizon. The person saw Silas and quickly hid the mirror in a pocket. They turned around and ran toward the middle of the ship. They disappeared into the shadows near the large barrels of water. Silas ran after them, but the deck was full of ropes, boxes, and heavy equipment. He lost the person in the darkness. "Everyone on deck. Now!" Silas shouted. The crew woke up quickly. They gathered in the center of the ship. They looked tired and confused in the moonlight. Marco, Leo, and the other sailors stood in a line. Silas looked at each man's face. "One of you was signaling to the enemy," Silas said. His voice was as cold as ice. "I saw the light of a mirror. We are being followed because someone here wants Captain Vane to find us. They want the silver shield for themselves." The sailors looked at each other with suspicion. Marco stepped forward, looking angry. "It was not me, Captain. I hate Vane. He is a criminal. I am a loyal sailor." Leo shook his head and looked at the floor. "I am loyal to you, Silas. You saved my life during the great storm. I would never help a man like Vane." Silas did not answer. He went to the small storage room near the back of the ship. He started to move the heavy bags of flour and the barrels of meat. Behind a wooden board, he found a small, hidden space. Inside the space, there was a small piece of paper. He opened the note and read it aloud. "The ship is going to the volcano island. I will light a fire at midnight. Follow the smoke." The crew was silent. The trust between the men was gone. Silas looked at the horizon. He knew Vane was out there, waiting for the signal. "We do not know who wrote this yet," Silas said. "But from this moment, no one works alone. Everyone stays in pairs. If I see a mirror or a fire, the person responsible will face the sea." The Sea Serpent continued its journey, but the air felt heavy with secrets. They were now fighting a hidden enemy inside their own home. The next morning, The sun did not rise with its usual golden light. Instead, a heavy, white wall appeared on the horizon. It moved toward the Sea Serpent like a giant ghost. Within minutes, the ship was inside a thick, cold fog. The air became wet, and it was very difficult to breathe. Silas stood at the front of the ship, but he could not even see the wooden carving of the snake at the bow. "Isabella, can you see the stars?" Silas called out. His voice felt flat and small in the heavy air. "No." Isabella answered from the wheel. "I cannot see the sky, and I cannot see the water. The compass is still spinning. We are sailing in the dark, Silas." The crew was very quiet. They moved like shadows on the deck. The sailors were afraid. They called this place the Fog of Lost Souls. Old legends said that ships entered this mist and never came out. They said the spirits of old pirates lived in the white clouds, waiting to pull sailors into the deep, cold water. "Stay together," Silas ordered. "Marco, stay near Leo. Do not let the fog separate you." The ship moved very slowly. There was no wind, but the Sea Serpent continued to glide forward as if an invisible hand was pulling it. The only sound was the soft movement of the water against the side of the ship. There were no birds and no waves. It was the quietest place Silas had ever visited. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the darkness. It was not a loud noise. It sounded like a woman singing a sad song, far away. The melody moved through the fog, rising and falling with the wind. The sailors stopped working and listened. Their faces were pale with fear. "Do not listen to the voices," Isabella warned. She gripped the wheel so hard her hands turned white. "It is just the wind moving through the wet ropes. It is not a ghost." "The air is getting colder," Leo whispered. He wrapped his arms around his chest. "I feel like someone is watching us from the water." Silas walked to the center of the deck and picked up a lantern. He lit it, but the light did not go far. It only made the fog look like a glowing yellow wall. He looked at the silver shield. It was resting against the main mast. Surprisingly, the shield began to glow with a faint, blue light. The symbols of the sea and the volcano were shining. "Look at the shield," Silas shouted. The blue light from the shield cut through the white fog. It created a path of light on the dark water, pointing straight ahead. It was not a map of paper, but a map of light. "Follow the light, Isabella," Silas commanded. "The Sea King is showing us the way through the souls." Isabella turned the wheel. The ship followed the blue glow. They did not know where the path led, but they knew they could not stay in the fog forever. The traitor was forgotten for a moment. Everyone wanted to survive the mist. They moved deeper into the white world, guided by the magic of the silver shield. The blue light from the silver shield was very strong now. It looked like a glowing bridge on the dark surface of the ocean. The Sea Serpent followed this path slowly. Around the ship, the white fog was still thick and cold, but something new was happening in the water. "Silas, look down," Isabella called from the wheel. Her voice was full of wonder. Silas walked to the edge of the ship and looked into the deep water. Below the waves, hundreds of tiny, glowing lights appeared. They were bright green and gold. They looked like stars that fell from the sky and into the sea. These lights moved in long, swirling lines, following the blue path of the shield. "What are they?" Marco asked. He stood next to Silas, holding a rope. He no longer looked afraid. The beauty of the lights made the crew feel calm. "I think they are small sea creatures," Silas replied. "The shield is calling to them. They are showing us the way out of the fog." The ship felt lighter now. The heavy, wet feeling of the fog of lost souls began to go away. The strange singing voice from the mist was gone. Instead, the water made soft, rhythmic sounds against the hull. The glowing creatures in the water moved faster, and the Sea Serpent moved with them. Suddenly, the ship pushed through a final wall of white mist. In an instant, the air became dry and warm. The fog was behind them now, sitting like a giant cloud on the water. Above them, the sky was clear and black. Thousands of real stars sparkled in the night. The stars! Isabella shouted happily. I can see the blue star again. We are on the right course. Silas looked back at the fog. He could see the faint blue glow of the shield reflected on the white clouds. Then, he looked at the horizon in front of the ship. Far away, a large, dark shape rose from the ocean. It was a giant mountain with a flat top. A small, red glow sat at the very peak. The volcano. Silas whispered. The island of fire. The silver shield on the deck stopped glowing. The blue light faded, and it became a regular piece of silver again. The glowing creatures in the water also disappeared back into the deep sea. They did their job. They led the crew to their final destination. We will reach the island by morning. Silas told his crew. But remember, Captain Vane is still behind us, and we still have a traitor on this ship. Do not sleep too deeply tonight. We are very close to the crown, and that is when things become most dangerous. The sailors nodded. They looked at the red glow of the volcano. They were tired, but they were also excited. The treasure of the Sea King was almost within their reach. The sun rose quickly, and it was very hot. The cool air from the night was gone. Now, the wind carried the smell of smoke and sulfur from the volcano. The island of fire was much closer now. Its black cliffs rose high above the blue water. Captain Silas stood on the deck, feeling the heat on his face. He was thirsty, and he knew his men were thirsty too. Leo! Silas called out. Bring some fresh water for the crew. They worked hard all night. Leo nodded and went down the wooden stairs to the storage room. This was where the ship kept the large wooden barrels of water and the bags of dried food. A few minutes passed, but Leo did not return. Instead, Silas heard the sound of heavy footsteps running back up the stairs. Leo's face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "Captain," Leo said, his voice dry and thin. "There is a problem. A very big problem." Silas and Isabella followed Leo back down into the dark storage room. The room was usually full of the smell of salt meat and wet wood. But now, there was a different smell, the smell of wine and vinegar. Silas looked at the floor. It was wet. He walked to the first water barrel and tapped it. It made a hollow, empty sound. He checked the second barrel, and then the third. They are all empty. Silas whispered. He looked at the bottom of the barrels. Someone had used a small tool to make holes in the wood. All the fresh water had leaked out into the sea during the night. And the food? Isabella asked, her voice full of worry. Silas opened a large wooden box. Inside, the bags of bread and dried fruit were covered in black ants and green mold. Someone had poured salt water over the food to ruin it. There was almost nothing left to eat. The traitor, Silas said. He hit the wall with his fist. They did not just signal Vane. They want to kill us with hunger and thirst. Without water, the crew cannot sail the ship. They went back up to the deck. The sailors were waiting. When they heard the news, a heavy silence fell over the Sea Serpent. Marco sat on a crate, looking at his dry hands. The heat of the volcano made their thirst even worse. Every man felt the fire in his throat. "We have no water and no food." One sailor said, "How can we reach the volcano? We should turn back to the nearest port." "No," Silas said firmly. He pointed to the island of fire. "The port is 3 days away. The island is only a few hours away. The map shows a stream of fresh water near the base of the mountain. If we turn back now, we will die of thirst on the open sea. Our only choice is to move forward. Isabella stood next to Silas. The captain is right. We must be strong. We can see the island. We can see our goal. Do not let the traitor win by making you afraid. The sailors looked at the volcano. It looked like a giant, angry monster, but it was their only hope. They stood up slowly and returned to their ropes. They moved slowly because they were tired and weak, but they did not stop. The Sea Serpent continued to move toward the black cliffs. They had to reach the land before the sun went down, or they would not survive another night. The Sea Serpent arrived at the base of the volcano. The black cliffs were very tall. They looked like walls of stone reaching into the clouds. The sun was hot, and the sailors were very weak. Their lips were dry, and their eyes were tired. Silas stood at the front of the ship. He looked at the coast very carefully. He was looking for a place to hide. Captain Vane is not far behind us. Silas said to Isabella, "If we stay in the open water, he will see us. We need to find a secret place." Isabella looked at the map. The map shows a small opening in the rocks. It is hidden by long green plants and tall trees. It says the water is deep enough for a ship, but it looks very narrow. Silas steered the ship closer to the cliffs. The sailors looked at the stone walls with fear. It looked like there was no way inside. But then, Silas saw something. Between two giant black rocks, there was a curtain of long, green vines. The vines hung down from the top of the cliff all the way to the water. There! Silas pointed. "Isabella, take the wheel. We are going through the plants." The crew moved slowly. They did not have much energy left. They pulled the ropes to move the sails. The Sea Serpent glided toward the wall of green. For a moment, it looked like the ship was going to hit the rocks. The sailors held their breath. Then, the front of the ship pushed through the soft vines. The ship entered a secret world. Inside the cliffs, there was a beautiful, quiet cove. The water was as clear as glass and very blue. The tall walls of the volcano protected the cove from the wind and the sun. It was much cooler inside. Most importantly, the cove was shaped like a circle. From the outside, no one could see the ship. They were safe from Captain Vane's eyes. "Look at the beach!" Leo shouted. He pointed to the back of the cove. A small stream of clear water fell from a rock and into a pool on the white sand. It was the fresh water from the map. The sailors did not wait for an order. They lowered the small boat and rowed to the shore as fast as they could. When they reached the beach, they ran to the water. They drank and drank. The water was cold and sweet. It felt like life returning to their bodies. Silas and Isabella walked onto the sand. Silas looked up at the volcano. High above them, the red glow was still visible against the darkening sky. The crown was up there, hidden in the fire and the stone. "We have water now," Silas said. "And we are hidden. Tomorrow, we start the climb. We must find the crown before the traitor finds a way to tell Vane where we are." Isabella nodded. She looked at the crew. They were resting on the sand, looking happy for the first time in days. But she knew the hardest part was still ahead of them. They had to climb the mountain of fire. The sun was not yet high, but the air was already very warm. The island of fire felt alive. The ground was made of black, hard stone that came from the volcano long ago. Silas, Isabella, and 3 of their strongest sailors, Marco, Leo, and a man named Aries, prepared for the long walk. They carried ropes, small bags of food they saved, and the silver shield. "The path starts behind the waterfall," Silas said. He looked at the silver shield. The symbols on the metal looked different in the morning light. They seemed to point toward a narrow trail hidden by dark bushes. The climb was very difficult from the start. The rocks were sharp and moved under their boots. Silas led the way. He used his hands to pull himself up over large blocks of stone. The smell of the air changed as they went higher. It no longer smelled like the sea. It smelled like burnt wood and sulfur. "Be careful where you step," Isabella warned. She was right behind Silas. "The stone is thin in some places. There might be holes leading deep into the mountain." After 2 hours of climbing, they stopped to rest on a flat piece of rock. From this height, they could look down into the secret cove. The Sea Serpent looked like a tiny toy boat in the blue water. The green vines hid it perfectly. However, when Silas looked further out to the open sea, his face became serious. "Do you see that?" Silas asked, pointing to the horizon. Isabella looked. A thin line of black smoke was visible far away. "It was a ship. It is Vane," she whispered. "He is searching for us. He knows we are near this island. We must move faster," Silas said. He stood up, even though his legs were tired. "We cannot let him catch us while we are on this mountain." The group continued the ascent. The trail became steeper. Sometimes they had to use the ropes to help each other climb over high walls of black rock. The heat from the ground began to rise. Silas could feel the warmth through the thick leather of his boots. The volcano was not sleeping. It was breathing. "Look at the ground," Marco said. He pointed to a small crack in the stone. A thin line of grey smoke was coming out of the earth. The sound of the mountain was a constant, low vibration. It felt like a giant heart beating deep below them. "We are close to the middle of the mountain," Isabella said, checking her notes. "The map says there is a hidden door near a rock that looks like a sitting lion." They searched for another hour. Finally, Ares shouted and pointed toward a large formation of stone. It did look like a lion watching the sea. Behind the lion, there was a dark opening. It was the entrance to the higher parts of the volcano. Silas took a deep breath. The air inside the cave would be hot, but the crown was waiting. The group stepped through the dark opening behind the lion rock. They expected the cave to be pitch black, but it was not. Instead, the entire space was filled with a deep, glowing orange light. The air was very thick and dry. It felt like standing too close to a giant kitchen fire. Silas wiped the sweat from his forehead and held his lantern, but he did not need to light it. "Look down there," Isabella whispered. She pointed to a deep crack in the cave floor. Far below them, a slow river of red liquid moved through the stone. It was lava, the liquid fire of the mountain. It did not make a sound, but the heat coming from it was incredible. The walls of the cave were covered in black glass that reflected the orange glow. "The map says the path continues across the fire," Silas said. He looked at a narrow bridge made of natural stone. The bridge was thin and had no rails. It crossed over the glowing river of lava. One wrong step would be the end of their journey. "I will go first," Silas decided. He took a deep breath of the hot air. He held the silver shield tightly. He stepped onto the stone bridge. His boots made a soft sound on the hard rock. He moved slowly, keeping his balance. The heat was so strong that his skin felt tight and dry. When he reached the middle of the bridge, he looked down. The lava was beautiful but terrifying. Isabella, Marco, Leo, and Ares followed him one by one. They moved like shadows against the bright orange light. No one spoke. They were all focused on their feet. Finally, they reached the other side of the cave. In front of them was a small stone pedestal. It was carved with the same wave symbols as the iron key. On top of the pedestal sat a heavy circle made of pure, yellow gold. It was decorated with small white pearls. "Is that it?" Leo asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Is that the crown?" "It is the base of the crown," Silas explained. He reached out and picked up the golden circle. It was surprisingly heavy. He looked at the top of the circle and saw 3 empty holes. The crown is in pieces. This is the first part. The legends say the Sea King divided his crown to keep it safe from greedy men. Silas put the golden base into his leather bag. He felt a great sense of success, but he also felt the mountain shake again. A low vibration moved through the floor. Small pieces of dust fell from the ceiling. The mountain is not happy that we took its gold, Marco said nervously. He looked back at the narrow bridge. We cannot stay here. Isabella said. The heat is too much, and the air is getting bad. We must find the exit to the higher cliffs. They turned away from the lava river and began to climb a set of stairs carved into the cave wall. Each step took them higher and further away from the fire, but Silas knew the second piece would be even harder to find. Silas looked at the golden circle he held in his hands. It was beautiful, but he felt that something was wrong. He looked at the stone pedestal again. The wave symbols were not just decorations. They were buttons. Silas remembered the drawings on the silver shield. He pressed the symbol of the largest wave with his thumb. The ground made a deep, groaning sound. The stone pedestal did not move, but the heavy wall behind it began to slide to the side. It was a secret door made of thick, black rock. As the wall opened, a cool wind blew out from the darkness. Inside, there was a small, square room. In the center of this secret room, there was a second pedestal. This one was made of white marble. On top of it sat the real first piece. It was a thick crown of gold, much larger and heavier than the circle Silas found first. It was decorated with giant blue diamonds that looked like drops of ocean water. The first circle was a trap. Silas realized. He put the small gold circle back on the first pedestal and walked into the secret room. This is the true foundation of the Sea King's crown. Silas picked up the heavy crown. It felt cold, even in the heat of the volcano. As soon as he touched it, the blue diamonds began to glow with a soft light. This light showed the way to a small table in the corner of the room. On the table, there was an old piece of leather with writing on it. Isabella walked to the table. She read the words aloud. The first piece is the shore. It gives the king power over the land and the sand. But the shore is nothing without the deep. You must find the heart of the sea to complete the circle. The heart of the sea. Silas repeated. That must be the second piece. The map says it is in the underwater temple. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the tunnel outside the lava cave. It was the sound of heavy boots and angry voices. The crew froze. Marco ran to the edge of the secret room and looked out toward the stone bridge. Captain! It is Vane's men. Marco whispered. They are at the entrance of the cave. They have torches, and they are coming across the bridge. Silas looked at his team. They were trapped. The secret room had only one door, and the enemy was coming through the only path. He looked at the blue diamonds in the crown. Their light was pointing up, toward the ceiling of the secret room. Look! Silas pointed. Above them, there was a narrow hole in the rock. It was like a chimney that went straight up through the mountain. Small plants grew along the sides of the hole. It was a difficult climb, but it was their only chance to escape. Marco, Leo, go first. Silas ordered. Help Isabella climb. I will stay here and block the door. Silas pulled his sword. He stood at the entrance of the secret room. He could see the light of Vane's torches getting closer. The heat of the lava was strong, but the heat of the coming battle was stronger. He had the first piece of the crown, and he was not going to give it up. The sound of heavy boots on the stone bridge grew louder. Silas stood at the entrance of the secret room. He held his sword firmly. Behind him, Isabella and Leo were climbing the narrow chimney. Ares was already near the top. He was carrying the leather bag with the first piece of the crown inside. Silas trusted him because Ares was a strong climber. "Hurry!" Silas shouted. "They are almost here." Two of Vane's pirates reached the door. They were big men with dirty clothes and angry faces. Silas swung his sword. The metal hit the first pirate's blade with a sharp, ringing sound. Silas pushed the man back toward the edge of the lava. The pirate looked down at the glowing red fire and screamed in fear. He did not fall, but he stopped attacking. At that moment, Silas looked up. He expected to see a rope coming down to help him. Instead, he saw Ares standing at the top of the hole. Ares was not helping. He was holding the leather bag and looking down with a cold, mean smile. "Ares! Drop the rope!" Isabella yelled. She was still 3 meters from the top. Ares did not move. He looked at the gold crown in the bag. "I am tired of being a poor sailor, Silas," Ares said. His voice was loud and echoed through the cave. "Vane promised me a mountain of gold if I brought him the crown. But now that I have it, why should I share it with him? Or with you? You were the traitor," Silas said. He blocked another attack from a pirate. "You ruined the water. You ruined the food." "Yes." Ares laughed. "It was very easy. You were all too busy looking at the stars and the maps." Ares reached for a heavy stone near the exit. He pushed it with his boots. The large rock fell down the chimney. It hit the walls with a loud, crashing sound. Isabella moved quickly to the side, and the rock missed her head by only a few centimeters. It hit the floor of the secret room, filling the air with dust. "Goodbye, Captain," Ares shouted. He turned away and ran into the light of the upper mountain. He took the first piece of the crown with him. Silas was filled with anger, but he had no time to think. More of Vane's men were arriving at the door. The secret room was becoming a trap. Isabella and Leo climbed back down to the floor. They could not reach the top without the rope. "The way up is blocked," Leo cried. He looked at the pirates at the door. "What do we do now?" Silas looked around the room. The dust was thick. The pirates were moving forward, and Vane was probably right behind them. Silas looked at the silver shield. It was still on the floor. He remembered the drawings. There was another symbol on the shield, a symbol of a bird. "We cannot go up, and we cannot go back," Silas said. He pointed to the back of the room. "The shield shows a second hidden door. We must find it now, or we are dead men." The pirates were at the door of the secret room. Silas held his sword, but he knew they could not stay and fight 10 men in such a small space. The air was thick with the dust from the fallen rock. Isabella and Leo looked at the walls, their faces full of fear. The orange glow of the lava cave was now blocked by the enemy. "Look at the shield, Silas," Isabella said. She held her lantern close to the silver surface. "The bird. The albatross." Silas looked at the silver shield. In the bottom corner, there was a small drawing of a sea bird with wide wings. It was the symbol of the wind and the way home. Silas remembered the drawings in his old books from the port city. He reached out and pressed the small, round eye of the bird with his thumb. At first, nothing happened. Then, a large piece of the volcano rock began to sink into the floor. It revealed a narrow, dark tunnel that went deep into the side of the mountain. It looked like a cold, black throat waiting to swallow them. "In there. Go now," Silas commanded. Leo went first, crawling into the small space. Isabella followed him. Silas looked back at the entrance of the room. The first pirate was stepping through the door. He was a man with a large scar on his forehead. He saw Silas and raised a heavy iron axe. "Stop right there, pirate," the man shouted. Silas did not wait to answer. He jumped into the tunnel and pulled the silver shield inside with him. As soon as he was in, he reached for a small iron lever on the inner wall. He pulled it down with all his strength. The heavy stone door rose back up from the floor. It shut with a solid, heavy sound that shook the ground. The room was suddenly completely dark. Silas could not see his own hands. The only sound was the heavy breathing of his friends. The air here was different from the lava cave. It was cold and smelled like wet earth and very old stone. "Is everyone okay?" Silas asked. His voice echoed in the small space and sounded strange. "I am here," Isabella replied. "But my lantern is broken. The glass hit the floor when I jumped into the tunnel. The oil is gone. I have my flint and steel," Leo said. Silas heard the sound of metal hitting stone. A few small sparks flew into the air, but they did not catch fire. "The wood I have is too wet from the cave mist. I cannot make a light for us." They were trapped in the dark. They did not know if the tunnel went to the sea or if it was a dead end. Behind them, they could hear the pirates hitting the stone door with their axes. The sound was muffled but steady. The enemy was trying to break through the wall to get to them. "We must move forward," Silas said. He put his hand on the cold wall. "Put your hands on the rock. Follow the person in front of you. Stay close together. Do not let go." They began to walk into the darkness. Every step was a mystery. They did not know if there was a hole in the floor or if the ceiling was too low. The silence of the mountain was heavy. Silas felt the cold stone under his fingers. He hoped the Sea King had a plan for them, because right now, they were lost in the heart of the volcano without a light. The darkness in the tunnel was heavy. Silas kept his left hand on the cold, wet wall of the mountain. With his right hand, he held Isabella's arm. Leo followed closely behind them. They walked for a long time in total silence. The only sound was the soft rhythm of their breathing and the occasional drop of water falling from the ceiling. Silas felt a light breeze on his face. It was a good sign. It meant the tunnel had an opening. "Do you smell that?" Isabella whispered. "It is not sulfur anymore. It is salt. We are getting closer to the sea." "I see something," Leo cried out. Ahead of them, a tiny point of light appeared. It was small, like a single star in a black sky. They moved faster. The tunnel became narrower, and they had to crawl on their hands and knees. The floor was covered in small, sharp stones that hurt their palms. But the light grew larger and brighter. It was not the orange light of the lava. It was the bright, white light of the sun. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel. Silas pushed himself out of the hole and stood up. He had to cover his eyes with his hand because the sun was so bright. When his eyes adjusted, he realized they were standing on a narrow stone ledge. The ledge was high on the side of the volcano cliff, hundreds of meters above the ocean. "We are out," Silas said, looking at the blue horizon. "But we are stuck on a wall of rock." They looked down. The cliff was almost vertical. There was no path down to the beach. Below them, the secret cove was visible. They could see the Sea Serpent resting in the quiet water. Suddenly, Silas saw a small wooden boat moving across the cove. It was Marco and the remaining loyal sailors. "Marco!" Silas shouted. His voice echoed across the water. "Marco, look up." On the boat, Marco stopped rowing. He looked around the cove, confused. Silas took the silver shield and held it toward the sun. He moved the shield until it caught the light. A bright flash of silver light hit the water near Marco's boat. Marco looked up and saw them. He waved his hat happily. He quickly turned the boat toward the base of the cliff. But there was a problem. The pirates on the beach also saw the flash of light. A group of Vane's men ran toward the water, pointing their muskets at the ledge. "They see us!" Leo yelled. Marco did not stop. He rowed the boat to the very bottom of the cliff, where the pirates could not see him because of the curve of the rock. He stood up in the boat and looked at a long rope coiled at his feet. He tied a heavy stone to the end of the rope and threw it upward with all his strength. The rope flew through the air. Silas reached out and caught it. He pulled the rope up. It was thick and strong. He tied the end of the rope to a large, solid piece of the mountain. "Isabella, you go first," Silas said. One by one, they slid down the rope. It was a long and dangerous drop, but they reached the small boat safely. Marco pulled the oars, and they moved silently through the green vines and out of the cove. They were rescued from the mountain, but the first piece of the crown was still in the hands of the traitor, Ares. The small boat reached the side of the Sea Serpent. Silas was the first to climb the wooden ladder. He felt the familiar wood of his ship under his hands, and it made him feel stronger. The sailors who stayed on the ship were happy to see their captain. They helped Isabella and Leo onto the deck. Everyone looked tired. Their clothes were dirty from the volcano dust, and their faces were red from the heat. "Is the ship ready to sail?" Silas asked immediately. He did not have time for rest. "Yes, Captain," a sailor named Tom answered. "The anchor is ready, and we have enough fresh water for a few days. But we saw Ares. He did not come back to the ship. He took a small boat from the other side of the beach and rowed toward the black ship." Silas looked at the horizon. The shadow, Captain Vane's ship, was still there. It looked like a dark ghost on the blue water. Ares was probably there now, showing the golden crown to Vane. Silas felt a sharp pain of anger in his chest. He trusted Ares, and Ares stole their prize. "We lost the first piece," Leo said sadly. He sat on a wooden crate and put his head in his hands. "All that work for nothing." "It is not for nothing," Isabella said firmly. She placed the silver shield on the navigation table. "We still have the shield. Ares has the gold, but he does not know how to find the rest. The shield is the real key to the Sea King's treasure." Silas walked to the wheel. He looked at the white sails. They were still strong. "Raise the sails," he commanded. "We must leave this island now. Vane has the first piece, so he will be coming for us. He knows we have the shield." The crew moved quickly. The Sea Serpent began to move away from the black cliffs of the volcano. The cool sea wind felt wonderful after the hot air of the cave. Silas turned the wheel, guiding the ship toward the open ocean. Behind them, the island of fire became smaller and smaller. "Where are we going, Silas?" Marco asked. He was cleaning his sword with a piece of cloth. Isabella looked at the silver shield again. The symbols were glowing very softly in the sunlight. "The map on the shield is changing," she said with surprise. "The drawing of the volcano is gone. Now, there is a drawing of a deep blue hole in the middle of the ocean. There are giant waves and a stone temple under the water. The heart of the sea," Silas whispered. "The second piece of the crown. It is not on an island, it is under the waves. But we cannot breathe underwater," Leo said. "How can we find a temple at the bottom of the sea?" "The Sea King was a master of the ocean," Silas replied. "The shield led us through the fog and showed us the way to the volcano. It will show us how to reach the temple. But first, we must outrun Captain Vane." The Sea Serpent moved faster as the wind grew stronger. They were back on the open sea, and the race for the second piece was starting. The sun was bright and the sky was clear. The Sea Serpent moved quickly across the blue water. Captain Silas stood at the back of the ship. He looked at the horizon through his brass telescope. He was looking for Captain Vane's black ship, the Shadow. He did not see any black sails. However, he saw something else that made him feel very nervous. Far to the east, a very large ship appeared. It did not have the dark sails of a pirate. It had tall, clean white sails that sparkled in the sun. It was a massive ship with 3 levels of cannons. At the top of the main mast, a blue and red flag moved in the wind. The Royal Navy. Silas whispered. Isabella walked over to him. She saw the ship and frowned. That is the Indomitable. It is the governor's biggest ship. They must have followed us all the way from the port city. The Navy ship was much larger than the Sea Serpent. It was slower, but it had more than 40 cannons. If it got close, it could destroy Silas's ship with one single attack. The Navy did not care about the legend of the Sea King. They only wanted to catch pirates and take their gold. Are they moving toward us? Marco asked. He looked worried. He was still tired from the volcano climb. Yes. Silas said. They have the wind behind them. They are moving fast. We cannot fight a ship of that size. We must find a way to lose them. But we are in the middle of the open sea. Isabella said. There are no islands to hide behind. The water here is deep and flat. Silas looked at the silver shield on the table. He remembered the drawings. He saw a small symbol of a cloud near the drawing of the deep blue hole. The map shows a place where the weather changes quickly. Silas said, there is a region of permanent mist ahead. If we can reach it, the Navy will not be able to see us. But Silas, if we enter the mist, we might get lost again. Leo warned. And what if Vane is already there, waiting for us? We have no choice. Silas replied firmly. The Navy will capture us if we stay here. At least in the mist, we have a chance to hide. The sailors worked hard to adjust the sails. They wanted to get every bit of power from the wind. The Sea Serpent began to lean to the side as it picked up speed. Behind them, the Indomitable was getting closer. Silas could see the sun reflecting off the many cannons on the Navy ship. Suddenly, a cloud of white smoke appeared from the side of the Navy ship. A loud, heavy sound traveled across the water. A heavy iron ball hit the sea 100 meters behind the Sea Serpent. A giant splash of water rose into the air. They are shooting at us. Leo shouted. Keep her steady. Isabella. Silas yelled. We only need 10 more minutes. The mist is just ahead. The Navy ship fired again, but the Sea Serpent was a small and difficult target. The ship raced toward a wall of grey clouds on the horizon. They were leaving the bright sun and entering a place of shadows. Silas hoped the mist would protect them from the governor's soldiers. The transition into the mist was like sailing into a world of white wool. The loud of the Navy cannons suddenly sounded soft and far away. The wind died down to a whisper, and the Sea Serpent slowed its pace. Silas stood at the bow, straining his eyes to see through the grey veil. For a few minutes, there was no sound except for the water lapping against the hull. The Navy ship has stopped, Isabella said, checking the horizon behind them. The Indomitable is too heavy and too valuable to risk in the great mist. They are waiting for us to come back out. Then we must make sure we don't. Silas replied. As the mist began to thin slightly, the water beneath the ship changed color. It was no longer the deep, dark blue of the open ocean. It turned a brilliant, glowing turquoise. Looking over the side, Silas saw a forest of color rising from the seabed. It was a massive coral reef, stretching as far as the eye could see in both directions. This was not an ordinary reef. The coral grew in strange, tall shapes that looked like underwater towers and twisted trees. There were bright reds, deep purples, and neon yellows. Thousands of fish, some as small as a fingernail and others as long as a man's arm, darted between the stony branches. "It's beautiful," Leo whispered, leaning over the rail. "But look at the depth. The water is getting very shallow." "He's right," Silas said, his voice turning serious. "This is the labyrinth of bone. The coral here is as sharp as a sword. If we hit it, the sea serpent will have its bottom torn open in seconds." The map on the silver shield began to pulse with a steady, rhythmic blue light. As Silas watched, a series of glowing lines appeared on the silver surface, forming a complex path through the reef. It wasn't a straight line. It was a zigzag pattern that moved between the tallest towers of coral. "Isabella, take the wheel. I'll call out the turns," Silas commanded. "Marco, Leo, go to the sides with poles. If we get too close to a reef head, push us off gently." The next hour was a test of nerves. The ship moved at a walking pace. Several times, the jagged edges of the coral were so close that they scraped against the side of the ship. Silas watched the shield, directing Isabella through turns that seemed impossible. Suddenly, the reef stopped. The colorful forest ended abruptly at a perfectly circular edge. In front of them, the water turned from turquoise to a blue so dark it looked almost black. It was a giant underwater pit, a deep blue hole. "There it is," Isabella said, her voice filled with awe. "The heart of the sea." In the center of the dark circle, deep under the water, Silas could see the faint, glowing outline of a building. It was the stone temple. It sat at the bottom of the hole, guarded by the reef and the mist. They had found the location of the second piece, but now they faced a new problem. The piece was 100 meters below them, and the air was only at the surface. The crew stood at the edge of the ship, staring down into the dark, circular void of the deep blue hole. The water was perfectly still, like a black mirror. Somewhere far below, the second piece of the crown, the heart of the sea, lay waiting in the silence of the temple. "We cannot swim that deep," Leo said, his voice trembling. The weight of the ocean would crush a man before he even reached the door. Silas didn't look discouraged. He turned to Marco and pointed toward the heavy wooden hatch leading to the cargo hold. "Bring up the iron pearl," he commanded. The sailors worked together to pull a strange object onto the deck. It was a large, bell-shaped chamber made of thick oak wood and reinforced with heavy copper bands. It had small, thick glass windows on 3 sides and a heavy iron ring at the top. This was an early diving bell, a secret tool Silas had used once before to salvage sunken gold. "How does it work?" Isabella asked, touching the cold copper. "Air is trapped inside the top as the bell sinks," Silas explained. "It creates a pocket where we can breathe. But it is dangerous. The deeper we go, the smaller that pocket becomes. We will have very little time." Silas and Isabella prepared for the descent. They gathered their tools. A heavy iron lantern that burned a special oil to resist the dampness. 2 sharp daggers in case of sea predators. The silver shield, which they hoped would open the temple door. They stepped inside the cramped, dark space of the bell. It smelled of old leather and metal. Marco and the rest of the crew attached the bell to the ship's strongest crane. "Lower away," Silas shouted. With a splash, the bell hit the water. At first, the bright sunlight made the water look like liquid gold. But as they sank deeper into the hole, the light faded. The turquoise changed to a dim blue, and then to a dark, heavy gray. The only sound was the bubbling of air escaping from the bottom of the bell and the creaking of the wood as the water pressed against it. Through the small glass windows, Silas saw strange, pale fish with no eyes. They drifted past like ghosts. The pressure began to make his ears pop. Isabella grabbed his hand. Her palm was cold. "Look," She whispered. At the very bottom of the hole, a structure began to emerge from the darkness. It was not a ruin. It was a magnificent temple built of white stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. It had tall columns and a massive door carved with the image of a giant octopus. The bell settled onto the sandy floor. They were at the bottom of the world. Silas looked at the water level inside the bell. It had risen to their waists. They had enough air for maybe 10 minutes. "We have to be fast," Silas said. He grabbed the shield and prepared to swim out from under the rim of the bell. "If the door doesn't open immediately, we have to come back up." They took one last deep breath of the stale, pressurized air and dived into the freezing black water, swimming toward the silent gates of the Sea King's heart. The water was a crushing weight against Silas's chest as he kicked toward the temple. Beside him, Isabella moved with the grace of a mermaid, her hair trailing behind her like dark seaweed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of Silas's own heartbeat. The white stone of the temple glowed with an eerie, pale light that illuminated the swirling silt on the ocean floor. As they reached the massive doors, Silas held up the silver shield. The carvings of the giant octopus seemed to shiver. One of the stone tentacles moved, sliding across the door to reveal a keyhole shaped exactly like the shield's central boss. Silas pressed the shield into the stone. With a soundless vibration that Silas felt in his teeth, the doors swung inward. They swam into the main chamber. Inside, the water was perfectly clear. In the center of the room, floating above a white marble altar, was the heart of the sea. It was a giant, teardrop-shaped sapphire, larger than a man's fist. It didn't just reflect light, it pulsed with a deep, rhythmic blue glow, as if it were breathing. Silas reached out, his lungs beginning to burn with the need for air. As his fingers brushed the cool surface of the sapphire, the temple suddenly changed. The pale light turned a sharp, electric blue. The first vision. Silas saw the ocean as it was thousands of years ago, with cities of glass and gold. The second vision. He saw the Sea King, wearing the full crown, commanding the waves to protect his people. The third vision. He saw a dark shadow. Captain Vane, holding the first piece of the crown, his face twisted in a cruel grin. The sapphire was not just a jewel. It was a memory. Silas grabbed it, and the weight of the gem almost pulled him to the floor. It was incredibly heavy, dense with the power of the deep. Isabella pointed toward the door and then to her chest, signaling that their air was almost gone. They turned and swam back toward the diving bell. The journey felt twice as long as before. Silas's vision began to blur at the edges. When they finally reached the bell and broke the surface of the water inside, they both gasped, greedily sucking in the stale, metallic air. The water level in the bell had risen to their chins. We got it," Isabella panted, shivering from the cold. She looked at the glowing sapphire in Silas's hand. "It's beautiful. And terrifying. We have the heart," Silas said, coughing. He looked at the window. "But the temple is closing. And I think the mountain isn't the only thing that's angry." Outside the glass, the calm water of the blue hole was beginning to swirl. A powerful current was forming, threatening to spin the diving bell like a top. Above them, they could see the shadow of the Sea Serpent tossing violently on the surface. The heart of the sea wanted to stay in its home, and the ocean was prepared to fight to keep it there. The diving bell jerked violently to the left, slamming Silas against the cold copper wall. The sapphire in his hand pulsed with a frantic, rhythmic light, mirroring the chaos outside. Through the thick glass, the dark blue water of the hole was no longer still. It had transformed into a roaring spiral of white foam and debris. "The current is too strong," Isabella cried, clinging to the iron ring at the top of the bell. "The ship won't be able to pull us up." Above them, the Sea Serpent was in a desperate fight for survival. On the deck, Marco and Leo were throwing their entire weight against the capstan, the heavy wooden cylinder used to wind the ropes. The thick hemp line connected to the diving bell was stretched so tight it made a high-pitched, singing sound, like a violin string about to snap. "Heave! Heave together!" Marco shouted, his face turning a deep shade of red. The ship was being pulled toward the center of the vortex. The power of the whirlpool was creating a massive suction, a physical force pulling everything toward the bottom of the blue hole. Silas felt the weight of the water pressing against the bell. He knew that if the rope broke, they would be lost to the abyss forever. He looked at the heart of the sea. The gem was glowing brighter now, reacting to the turbulent water. "Isabella, the shield." Silas gasped, the air in the bell becoming thin and foul. "Place the heart against the shield." Isabella understood. She grabbed the silver shield and held it flat. Silas pressed the glowing sapphire into the center. As the two ancient artifacts touched, a shockwave of blue energy erupted from the bell. It wasn't fire or light. It was a wave of pure calm. The water immediately surrounding the bell stopped spinning. The energy from the heart was neutralizing the whirlpool's grip. The tension eased instantly. The Sea Serpent stopped tilting and leveled out. With a sudden burst of speed, the bell began to rise. They shot toward the surface like a cork from a bottle. When the bell finally broke the waves, the bright sunlight felt like a blessing. The crew cheered as they hauled the bell onto the deck. Silas and Isabella stumbled out, coughing and soaking wet, but alive. "We have it," Silas said, holding the sapphire high for the crew to see. But their victory was short-lived. As the mist cleared, they saw a familiar silhouette on the horizon. The shadow was back, and Captain Vane was no longer alone. Beside him sat the governor's navy ship, the Indomitable. The pirate and the law had made a deal. "They're coming for us," Marco said, pointing a trembling finger. "Both of them." The sight on the horizon was like a nightmare born of salt and iron. To the left, the Royal Navy ship, the Indomitable, sat heavy in the water, its white sails glowing like sharp teeth. To the right, the pirate ship, the Shadow, rode low and fast, its black hull cutting through the waves like a blade. "How is this possible?" Marco whispered, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. The governor's men would usually hang Vane from the highest mast. Why are they sailing together? Silas stood at the wheel, his eyes narrowed as he watched the two ships close the distance. "Greed makes strange bedfellows. Marco, Vane has the first piece of the crown, the golden foundation. The governor has the cannons and the men. They've made a deal to split the treasure of the Sea King." The Sea Serpent was caught in the middle of a deadly pincer movement. The Navy ship began to signal with bright-colored flags, while Vane's ship simply fired a single shot across their bow. The message was clear: surrender or be destroyed. Silas quickly gathered Isabella and his lead sailors near the navigation table. They compared the strengths and weaknesses of their enemies. "We cannot outrun them both, and we certainly cannot outfight them," Isabella said, her voice low. She looked at the heart of the sea sapphire, which sat on the table. It pulsed with a rhythmic blue light, almost like it was nervous. "If they get this, they'll have two of the three pieces. They'll be unstoppable." "They don't trust each other," Silas observed, a small, witty smile playing on his lips. "Look at the gap between them. They aren't sailing as one. They're racing each other to see who gets to us first." Suddenly, a voice boomed across the water, amplified by a brass speaking trumpet. It was Captain Vane. "Silas, hand over the jewel and the girl. The governor might let you live in a dark cell, but I'll let you walk the plank for free." A second voice, more refined but just as cold, followed from the Indomitable. "Captain Silas, you are in possession of stolen royal property. Surrender immediately and you will face a fair trial." A fair trial with the governor's rope around my neck. Silas muttered to himself. Silas, the sapphire is reacting. Isabella whispered. She pointed to the gem. The blue light was no longer just pulsing. It was projecting a thin, needle-like beam of light toward the north. It's pointing to the third piece. Silas realized. The crown of the abyss. It's not waiting for us to find it. It's calling to it. But to get there, we have to go through them. Leo said, pointing at the two massive ships now less than a mile away. Silas gripped the wheel. He looked at the white sails of the Navy and the black sails of the pirate. Then he looked at his crew, tired, wet, but still standing. We aren't going through them, he said, turning the wheel sharply. We're going to make them fight each other. The Sea Serpent was a small needle being threaded between two massive hammers. Silas kept the wheel steady, his eyes fixed on the narrow gap of water between the Indomitable and the Shadow. He was heading straight into the kill zone, where the broadside cannons of both ships could reach him. Silas, this is madness. Leo shouted over the roar of the wind. They'll crush us like a walnut. Not if they're aiming at each other. Silas replied, his voice calm and sharp. Isabella, the sapphire. Keep that beam of light steady. The maneuver. Silas waited until the very last second. He could see the gunners on the Indomitable lighting their fuses. He could see Captain Vane standing on the prow of the Shadow, his sword raised. The bait. Silas steered directly toward the Navy ship, making them think he was attempting to board or ram them. The pivot. As the Navy commander gave the order to fire, Silas shouted, "Hard to port." The crossfire. The Sea Serpent leaned so sharply that the deck was almost vertical. It slipped behind a massive wave just as the first volley of iron was unleashed. The timing was perfect. Because the Navy and the pirates were so focused on Silas, they had neglected their own proximity. The Indomitable's heavy cannons, intended for the Sea Serpent, flew over the small ship's masts and slammed directly into the Shadow's hull. Fire! Return fire! Vane screamed, thinking the Navy had betrayed him. The Shadow unleashed its own broadside. The pirate gunners didn't care for precision. They aimed for the white sails of the Indomitable. Within seconds, the uneasy alliance was shattered. The two giants were locked in a private war of pride and greed, leaving the Sea Serpent to skip away into the spray of the ocean. The price of escape. Despite the success of the maneuver, the Sea Serpent did not escape unharmed. A stray chain shot from the Indomitable had shredded the top of the main mast. "We're losing speed, Captain," Marco reported. "The rigging is a mess and the hull is taking on water from the splashes." Silas didn't look back at the chaos. He looked at the beam of blue light. It was pointing toward a dark patch of water where the sea seemed to boil. "We don't need speed anymore," he said. "We just need to get to the center of that light." The sapphire's beam grew wider, illuminating the water ahead. Under the surface, a massive shape began to rise. It wasn't an island, and it wasn't a reef. It was the Abyssal Gate, a structure of black obsidian and bone that had not seen the sun in 5,000 years. "The Navy and Vane will be done with their fight soon," Isabella warned, looking at the smoke on the horizon. "We have to find the last piece before they realize we're gone." The ocean ahead looked like a pot of boiling ink. Huge bubbles of cold gas burst on the surface, releasing a mist that smelled of ancient salt and deep earth minerals. In the center of this turmoil, the Abyssal Gate slowly emerged. It was a terrifying sight. Two massive pillars of black obsidian, carved into the shapes of skeletal sea serpents, reaching 50 feet into the air. Connecting them was an archway made of white, bleached whalebone, etched with runes that pulsed with a faint, violet light. "The ship won't survive that turbulence," Marco yelled, fighting to keep the Sea Serpent from spinning. The water was being pulled toward the center of the gate, creating a localized current that defied the wind. "We don't have to sail through the water," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. He looked at the heart of the sea sapphire and the silver shield. "We have to sail through the gate itself." As they drew closer, the violet runes on the bone arch began to glow brighter, responding to the blue light of the sapphire. The air between the pillars started to shimmer, turning from a simple view of the horizon into a swirling vortex of purple and indigo energy. It wasn't just a doorway. It was a bridge to the deepest trench of the world. The final guardian. Just as the bow of the Sea Serpent touched the shimmering energy, a massive shadow blocked the sun. From the boiling water beside the gate, a creature of nightmare rose. It was a deep-sea kraken, but unlike any Silas had ever seen. Its skin was translucent, showing glowing veins of violet energy, and its eyes were the size of the ship's main sails. The threat. The kraken wrapped 3 massive tentacles around the obsidian pillars, effectively closing the gate. The warning. It let out a low-frequency hum that vibrated the very wood of the ship, making the sailors' teeth ache. "It's a guardian," Isabella realized, holding the shield steady. "It thinks we are thieves. Silas. It doesn't know we are the ones meant to restore the crown." "Then we show it." Silas grabbed the sapphire and held it high above his head, standing right at the edge of the prow. "Guardian of the deep. We carry the heart. We carry the shield. The king's peace must be restored." The kraken paused. One giant, glowing eye swiveled toward Silas. The sapphire in Silas's hand let out a blinding pulse of blue light, perfectly matching the rhythm of the kraken's own glowing veins. For a heartbeat, there was a connection, a recognition between the ancient life of the sea and the artifacts of its ruler. Slowly, the kraken uncoiled its tentacles. It didn't retreat. Instead, it moved to the sides of the pillars, acting like a majestic, terrifying honor guard. It let out a softer hum, a sound that felt almost like a welcome. "The leap of faith. The Navy. They've cleared the smoke," Leo screamed, pointing back. On the horizon, the Indomitable and the Shadow had stopped firing at each other. Realizing they were losing their prize, they had turned their combined focus back toward the Sea Serpent. They were coming fast, their prows cutting through the waves. Full speed ahead. Silas commanded, "Into the gate." The Sea Serpent surged forward. As the ship passed through the shimmering energy between the obsidian serpents, the world turned upside down. The sound of the wind and the angry shouts of Vane's pirates vanished. They were no longer on the surface. They were falling, gently, into a world of eternal twilight. The transition was like stepping through a mirror. One moment, the Sea Serpent was being tossed by a boiling ocean. The next, it was gliding through a silence so deep it felt like velvet. They weren't sinking. A massive, shimmering bubble of golden energy surrounded the ship, holding the crushing weight of the ocean at bay. "Look up," Isabella whispered, her voice filled with awe. Above them, through the translucent dome, they could see the dark underbelly of the ocean. Giant whales, looking like slow-moving clouds, passed overhead. But below them lay the true wonder. They were floating over the city of eternal twilight. It was a sprawling metropolis of white stone and blue glass, built into the side of a massive underwater canyon. As the ship descended toward a central plaza, the crew saw details that seemed impossible. Bioluminescent gardens. Forests of glowing kelp and trees made of living light that pulsed in shades of cyan and violet. Water bridges. Streams of water that flowed through the air, carrying colorful fish like liquid highways. The silent inhabitants. Tall, slender statues of the Sea King's people stood at every corner, their eyes made of the same glowing stone as the city walls. "It's empty," Marco said, his voice echoing. "A city of ghosts." Not ghosts, Marco, Silas replied, pointing toward the tallest spire in the center of the city. It's a tomb. And a treasury. The ship touched down softly on a bed of glowing white sand in the center of the great plaza. In front of them rose the spire of the abyss, a tower made of a single piece of dark, translucent crystal. At the very top, resting in a cradle of silver light, was the final piece of the legend, the crown of the abyss. Unlike the first two pieces, this was the frame that held everything together, a circlet of dark metal that seemed to absorb the light around it. We have to be careful, Silas warned, stepping off the ship onto the sand. The air inside the bubble was cold and smelled of ozone. The guardian at the gate let us in, but the spire will have its own tests. As they approached the crystal tower, the heart of the sea sapphire in Silas's hand began to vibrate. The blue beam of light it projected hit the base of the spire, and a set of stairs began to spiral upward, appearing out of thin air. Only those who carry the heart may climb, a voice suddenly echoed through the plaza. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. Silas, look. Isabella pointed back toward the abyssal gate. The golden dome was flickering. Outside, two dark shapes were pressing against the energy field. Vane's shadow and the Navy's Indomitable hadn't been stopped by the gate. They had been pulled into its wake. They were trapped against the outside of the bubble, their cannons useless, but their divers were already putting on heavy copper helmets, preparing to plunge into the bubble. They're coming for the finish, Silas said, gritting his teeth. Isabella, with me. Marco, Leo, protect the ship. We're getting that crown before the bubble breaks. The crystal stairs felt like ice beneath Silas's boots. Each step he and Isabella took caused the spire to hum, a low vibration that resonated in their chests. High above, the crown of the abyss pulsed with a dark, rhythmic light, waiting for its master. The bubble is weakening, Silas. Isabella called out, glancing back. Through the translucent walls of the spire, she could see the golden dome flickering. Dozens of divers in heavy copper suits were falling through the energy field like iron rain, their lead-soled boots hitting the white sand of the plaza. Keep moving, Silas urged. We're almost there. They reached the top of the spire, a flat platform open to the twilight sky. In the center, resting on a pillar of black glass, was the final piece. It was a circlet of abyssal iron, forged from the metal of fallen stars. It looked cold and hungry, as if it were waiting to be filled. As Silas reached for the iron circlet, a wall of violet fire erupted around the pillar. A figure formed within the flames, a shimmering, spectral image of the Sea King. His eyes were not blue like the sapphire, but a deep, swirling gray. To wear the crown is to carry the weight of the tides, the spirit's voice echoed. What do you seek, Captain? Gold for your pockets, or balance for the sea? Silas stood tall. He looked at the heart of the sea in his left hand and the silver shield on his arm. I seek neither gold nor power, Silas said, his voice steady. I seek to return what was stolen. The sea has been restless for too long. It deserves its peace. The spirit looked at Isabella, then back to Silas. With a slow nod, the violet fire vanished. Silas reached out and lifted the abyssal iron circlet. It was surprisingly light, but as he held it, he felt the pull of the entire ocean. Drop it, Silas. A voice rasped. Ares, the traitor, stood at the top of the stairs. He was soaking wet, his clothes torn, but in his hands, he held the first piece, the golden foundation they had lost at the volcano. Behind him, Captain Vane emerged from the shadows, his pistol aimed directly at Isabella's heart. You did the hard work for us, Captain, Vane sneered, his cold eyes fixed on the sapphire. Now, give me the heart and the iron, and maybe I'll let the girl breathe a little longer. You can't control it, Vane, Silas warned, stepping toward them. The crown requires the shield. Without it, the power will tear you apart. I'll take my chances, Vane growled. In a sudden move, Ares lunged forward, trying to grab the sapphire from Silas. At the same moment, the spire shook violently. The golden bubble had finally collapsed. A wall of water, held back only by the city's ancient enchantments, began to groan. Silas didn't fight Ares for the gem. Instead, he did something no one expected. He threw the abyssal iron circlet and the heart of the sea sapphire directly into the air toward the golden foundation in Ares's hands. "If you want the crown so badly," Silas shouted, "assemble it." As the three pieces touched in midair, a blinding flash of white light filled the spire. The pieces didn't just touch, they merged. The gold, the sapphire, and the iron snapped together with the force of a thunderclap. The true crown of the Sea King was reborn. The blinding light from the assembled crown did not fade. It transformed. The three pieces, the gold foundation, the sapphire heart, and the iron circlet, had fused into a single, majestic artifact that pulsed with the rhythm of the tides. It hovered in the air above the spire, casting a deep indigo glow that reached every corner of the underwater city. Ares, who had been closest to the flash, was thrown back against the crystal wall. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild with greed. "It's mine!" he screamed, reaching again for the floating crown. As his fingers brushed the gold, the heart of the sea let out a low, vibrating hum. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from the sapphire. It wasn't fire, but a blast of high-pressure water that sent Ares flying off the spire's platform. He tumbled into the dark waters below, lost to the shadows of the canyon. The crown chooses its own master. "Vain!" Silas shouted over the rising roar of the ocean. Captain Vane didn't care for legends. He leveled his pistol at Silas and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the chamber, but the lead bullet never reached its mark. 2 feet from Silas, the air shimmered. The bullet slowed, trapped in a sphere of rotating water that appeared out of nowhere, before dropping harmlessly to the floor. The restoration. Silas looked at the silver shield on his arm. The symbols were no longer just glowing. They were flowing like liquid. He realized the shield wasn't just a map. It was the anchor, the connection. Silas stepped toward the crown. He didn't grab it. He held the shield beneath it. The alignment. The crown descended slowly, fitting perfectly into a groove on the shield's surface that Silas hadn't noticed before. The awakening. As the two touched, the entire spire of the abyss lit up like a lighthouse. The spectral image of the Sea King reappeared. But this time he wasn't a flickering ghost. He looked solid, a giant of a man with skin like polished marble and eyes like the deep trench. He placed a translucent hand over Silas's. "The balance is restored." The king's voice boomed, vibrating through the very bones of everyone present. "The land has returned what belongs to the sea." Outside the spire, the failing golden bubble suddenly surged with power. The cracks vanished. The heavy water that had been groaning against the city's walls was pushed back. The city of eternal twilight began to wake up. Bioluminescent trees flared to life, and the silent statues began to move, their stone eyes glowing with a protective light. Captain Vane, seeing his chance at the treasure vanishing, tried to run for the stairs, but the city itself seemed to turn against him. The stone floor beneath his feet became as slick as ice, and the water bridges shifted, blocking his exit. "Your time is over, Vane," Silas said, his voice echoing with the authority of the crown. "The sea has no place for men who only know how to take." With a wave of the Sea King's hand, a powerful current swept Vane off the platform. He wasn't harmed, but he was carried away, out of the city and toward the surface, far from the treasure he had hunted so ruthlessly. The great plaza of the underwater city was now bathed in a steady, calming gold. The Sea King stood tall, his presence filling the spire with a sense of ancient peace. He looked at Silas and Isabella, his expression softening from the stern mask of a judge to the warm face of a grateful ruler. "You have done what no mortal has achieved in 5 millennia." The king spoke, his voice sounding like the gentle rush of a summer tide. You sought the crown not for its weight in gold, but to heal the world above. For this, the ocean owes you a debt. Silas bowed his head. I only wanted to protect my crew and finish the journey my father started. Your Majesty. The Sea King reached toward the crown, which now rested securely within the silver shield. He touched the center sapphire, and a small, glowing sphere of light detached from the gem, floating toward Silas's hand. The gifts of the deep. The king granted them 3 distinct blessings to ensure their safe return. The pearl of navigation. A small, iridescent orb that would always point toward home, ensuring the Sea Serpent would never again be lost in the fog. The mark of the tides. A glowing symbol on the ship's prow that would grant them the favor of the wind, allowing the ship to move faster than any vessel in the governor's fleet. The secret of the abyss. A single piece of knowledge whispered only to Silas, the location of a safe, hidden harbor where his crew could live without fear of Vane or the Navy. The crown must remain here, in the heart of the city, to maintain the balance. The Sea King explained, but you shall carry its light back to the surface. The ascent. With a final nod from the king, the spire began to glow with a brilliant white light. The golden bubble surrounding the Sea Serpent started to rise. Unlike the violent ascent of the diving bell, this movement was smooth and rapid. Silas and Isabella stood on the deck as the city of white stone and blue glass began to shrink below them. The guardian kraken swam alongside the ship for a moment, its massive eye blinking once in a silent farewell before it vanished into the dark blue depths. We're going home, Silas, Isabella said, her hand resting on the ship's rail. Not just home, Silas replied, looking at the pearl of navigation glowing in his palm. We're going to a new beginning. As the ship broke the surface of the water, the morning sun was just beginning to rise. The air was fresh and sweet, free of sulfur and smoke. The Indomitable and the Shadow were nowhere to be seen, swept away by the currents or discouraged by the power of the gate. The horizon was wide, open, and for the first time in years, truly safe. The Sea Serpent sailed into the secret harbor just as the sky turned a deep, bruised purple. It was exactly as the Sea King had described, a perfect crescent of golden sand hidden behind a wall of ancient, salt-resistant trees. The water here was so clear that the ship seemed to float in mid-air. There were no navy patrols, no pirate flags, and no greed, only the sound of the wind through the palms and the rhythmic lap of the tide. Silas stood at the prow, the pearl of navigation now a permanent fixture set into the ship's wheel. It no longer glowed with a fierce light, but emitted a soft, warm pulse that felt like the heartbeat of the ship itself. The fate of the crew. Life in the hidden harbor was different for everyone, but they all found what they had been searching for. Marco and Leo. They used the favor of the wind to establish a small, honest trading route between the nearby islands, always returning to the safety of the harbor before the moon rose high. Isabella. She spent her days documenting the flora and fauna of the island. Her journals, filled with sketches of bioluminescent plants and ancient ruins, became the most valuable treasure on the ship. The crew. No longer hunted men. They built a small village on the shore. They were no longer pirates or sailors of fortune. They were the keepers of the tide. The final secret. One evening, Silas walked alone to the highest point of the island. In his hands, he carried the silver shield. Its purpose was served. The map was gone, replaced by a smooth, mirror-like surface that reflected the stars. He found a small cave overlooking the ocean and placed the shield on a stone pedestal he had carved himself. Beside it, he laid the tattered, salt-stained map his father had given him so many years ago. You were right, Father, Silas whispered to the wind. The treasure wasn't the gold. It was the journey that proved who we were. The sea doesn't take, it tests. He didn't need the shield to navigate anymore. He had the memory of the blue light, the weight of the crown, and the respect of the King of the Abyss. He had turned a crew of desperate men into a family and a legend into a legacy. The legend continues. Back at the docks, the Sea Serpent sat at anchor, her hull patched and her sails mended. She was no longer just a vessel of wood and cloth. She was a part of the ocean's history. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, the water around her prow would glow with a faint indigo light, a reminder of where she had been and the power she had helped restore. Captain Silas looked out at the horizon one last time before heading down to the village. The fog of lost souls was gone. The island of fire was a distant memory. The ocean was vast, beautiful, and finally, at peace. 3 months of peace had transformed the crew of the Sea Serpent. The hidden harbor was no longer just a refuge, it was a home. The sailors had traded their cutlasses for hammers and fishing nets. Silas often sat on the porch of his small wooden house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The pearl of navigation, set into the center of the town square's fountain, pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic blue. It was the heartbeat of their new world. However, the sea began to whisper a different tune. It started on a Tuesday, when the tide failed to come in. The water simply stayed at its lowest point, exposing miles of jagged reef and pale, dying kelp. The fish, usually vibrant and curious, fled toward the deeper trenches. A heavy, metallic silence hung over the harbor, and the air tasted not of salt, but of ozone and scorched copper. "Silas, look at the pearl," Isabella said, her voice tight with concern. She had been studying the fountain all morning. The pearl was no longer blue. It had turned a stark, biting silver. Instead of its usual steady pulse, it was flickering rapidly, like a heart in a panic. As Silas approached, the water in the fountain began to swirl in the opposite direction of the Earth's rotation. A thin, needle-like beam of silver light shot out from the pearl, pointing not toward the Sea King city, but straight up toward the constellation of the Navigator's Spear. "The balance hasn't just been restored," Silas whispered, his old instincts flaring back to life. "It's been challenged. Something is pulling the power of the crown from above." Suddenly, the sky darkened, though there were no clouds. It was an eclipse, but not of the sun. A massive, dark shape began to move across the sky, drifting over the harbor like a floating mountain. It wasn't a bird, and it certainly wasn't a natural cloud. It was a vessel, a ship, but one with massive, rotating fans and sails made of shimmering silk. It looked like the sketches Silas had seen in the forbidden alchemical texts of the old world. "It's the governor," Marco shouted, running up from the docks. He didn't just want the sea. Silas. He spent the last 3 months building a way to take the sky. A voice boomed from the heavens, amplified by 1,000 brass pipes. "Captain Silas. You hid beneath the waves, but there is nowhere to hide from the iron zenith. Return the silver shield, or we shall rain fire upon your little paradise." Silas looked at his crew. They were tired of fighting, but the fire in their eyes hadn't gone out. He looked at the Sea Serpent, resting quietly in the low tide. She wasn't an airship, but she had the favor of the wind. He realized then that the Sea King's gift wasn't just for sailing. It was for the ultimate journey. "Get to the ship," Silas commanded. "The sea is leaving us, so we're going to find where it went." The Sea Serpent felt heavy as the crew scrambled onto her deck. Without the tide, the ship sat deep in the mud of the harbor. Silas gripped the wheel, feeling the pearl of navigation, which he had moved back to the ship, vibrating so hard it threatened to crack the wood. The silver light from the pearl was now a solid pillar, connecting the ship to the massive airship hovering above. "We're stuck in the mud, Silas," Leo cried, pointing at the receding waterline. "We can't sail on sand." "We aren't going to sail," Silas said, his eyes fixed on the iron zenith. "Isabella, the silver shield. We need the favor of the wind at full strength. Now." Isabella held the shield toward the sky. The symbols of the wind and the albatross flared with a blinding white light. A sudden, violent gale began to swirl around the Sea Serpent. It didn't push the ship forward. It lifted it. The wood groaned as the ship was pulled from the mud, the magical wind acting like 1,000 invisible hands. The Sea Serpent rose into the air, her hull dripping with seawater and silt. From the deck of the Iron Zenith, Governor Sterling looked down in shock. He was a man obsessed with order and industry. His ship was a triumph of coal, steam, and iron. He couldn't understand the organic, fluid magic of the Sea King. To him, the Sea Serpent was an impossibility, a wooden ghost defying the laws of gravity. "Open the vents." The governor screamed to his engineers. "Launch the steam drones. I want that shield brought to me in pieces if necessary." Small, metal spheres dropped from the belly of the airship. They hissed with steam and sprouted folding iron wings. These were the steam drones, the governor's newest invention. They swarmed toward the Sea Serpent like angry wasps, their mechanical claws clicking. "Archers, to the rails." Marco commanded. "Leo, get the hot oil. We can't let those things touch the sails." The battle in the sky was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. There were no waves to balance them, only the shifting currents of the upper atmosphere. The Sea Serpent bobbed and swayed as the drones attacked. One drone latched onto the mainmast, its iron teeth biting into the wood. Silas drew his sword, the blade glowing with a faint blue light from his time in the underwater city. With a single strike, he sheared through the drone's brass neck, sending it plummeting toward the island below. "Silas, the Iron Zenith is charging something," Isabella warned. At the front of the governor's ship, a massive brass lens began to glow with a sickly orange heat. It was an alchemical ray, designed to melt stone and iron alike. The governor wasn't just trying to capture them. He was willing to burn the sky to win. Silas knew they couldn't stay on the defensive. They had to go higher, into the very heart of the silver light. The Sea Serpent climbed higher, the air thinning until the tropical heat of the harbor was a distant memory. Below them, the Iron Zenith looked like a massive, angry beetle. The governor's alchemical ray fired again, a beam of concentrated orange energy that hissed through the air. Silas swung the wheel, the pearl of navigation glowing with a fierce violet intensity. The beam missed the hull by inches, boiling the moisture in the air and creating a localized thunderstorm. "We can't keep dodging forever," Marco yelled, his breath visible in the cooling air. The ship wasn't built for this altitude. "Silas, the wood is starting to creak under the pressure. The Sea King didn't just give us a boat." Silas shouted back, his eyes locked on a swirling ribbon of silver light above them. "He gave us a key." Isabella, the shield, pointed at the Starchaser wind. In the upper atmosphere, there exists a legendary current known as the Starchaser, a stream of celestial energy that moves faster than any storm on the surface. To the naked eye, it looks like a faint, shimmering aurora. To the silver shield, it was a highway. As Isabella aligned the shield, the Sea Serpent felt a sudden, massive jolt of acceleration. The ship didn't just move, it surged. The favor of the wind combined with the celestial current, turning the wooden vessel into a streak of blue light. The crew had to huddle together, holding onto the masts as the G-force pressed them into the deck. Silas used every ounce of his strength to keep the ship on the silver path. Behind them, the Iron Zenith struggled. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but it relied on the physics of the lower world. Its heavy iron hull and steam-driven fans were not designed for the ethereal currents of the Starchaser. The governor's ship began to vibrate violently, black smoke pouring from its vents as its engines overheated. "They are falling back," Leo cheered, watching the airship shrink into the distance. "Don't celebrate yet," Silas warned. "Sterling is a desperate man. He won't let us go that easily." As they reached the peak of the current, the silver light began to crystallize. The blue sky of the afternoon faded into a deep, midnight indigo, and the stars became visible even though the sun was still shining. Silas saw their destination, a floating archipelago of white clouds that looked as solid as stone. They were entering the sky reef, a place where the water of the earth meets the ice of the stars. The Sea Serpent glided into the sky reef, a silent world of towering white clouds and jagged ice formations that hung suspended in the air. The temperature plummeted. Within minutes, the rigging was coated in a fine layer of silver frost, and the sails became stiff and crystalline. The favor of the wind kept the ship afloat, but the magic was being drained by the intense cold. "Look at the water vapor," Isabella whispered, pointing toward a massive, swirling cloud bank ahead. "It's not just freezing, it's forming patterns." The clouds in the sky reef were made of alchemical ice, a substance that reacted to the presence of magic. As the ship moved, the clouds began to grow into beautiful, complex geometric shapes, hexagons and stars that hummed with a low, musical frequency. It was a labyrinth of frozen vapor, and Silas knew it was their only chance to lose the governor for good. "Take down the sails," Silas ordered. "We'll drift on the residual magic. We need to be as silent as a ghost." The crew moved with muffled footsteps, wrapping themselves in thick blankets and old canvas. The ship drifted into the heart of a massive, hollowed-out cloud. Inside, the light was refracted into 1,000 rainbows by the ice crystals. It was a cathedral of frozen air. The Iron Zenith had arrived. It was moving slowly, its massive brass spotlights cutting through the crystalline fog. The governor had used his alchemical ray at a lower setting to melt a path through the reef. "I know you're in there, Silas." Sterling's voice boomed, distorted by the ice. "You cannot hide in the heavens. This is the domain of man and machine now." The weight of the Iron Zenith was its undoing in the sky reef. The heat from its engines was causing the alchemical ice to melt and then refreeze instantly, trapping the airship's massive fans in blocks of solid ice. Silas watched from the shadows as the governor's ship began to tilt. The steam from the Zenith's vents was turning into a blizzard that blinded its own crew. "Now," Silas whispered. "Isabella, use the shield to focus the light. Not on them, on the ice above them." Isabella caught a ray of the setting sun with the silver shield and directed a beam of focused light onto a massive, overhanging ice spire. The heat caused the spire to crack. With a sound like a mountain breaking, tons of alchemical ice fell directly onto the Iron Zenith's upper deck. The airship groaned, its fans snapping under the weight. While the governor's men scrambled to clear the deck, the Sea Serpent slipped away, deeper into the frozen cloud, where the pearl of navigation was pointing toward something even more impossible, a floating temple of glass. The Sea Serpent drifted silently toward the center of the sky reef. Ahead, emerging from the prismatic fog, stood the glass temple. It was a structure of impossible beauty, built entirely of transparent, diamond-hard crystal that seemed to have been grown rather than built. The temple didn't sit on a cloud. It floated in the air, held in place by massive chains of solid light that anchored it to the surrounding ice peaks. "It's a mirror of the underwater city," Isabella observed, her voice barely a whisper. "The same architecture, the same flowing lines. But where the Sea King city was built for pressure and depth, this place is built for weightlessness and light." Silas steered the ship alongside a wide, crystal platform. There was no sound here, no wind, no mechanical hum from the governor's ship. Just the faint, high-pitched singing of the glass as it vibrated with the energy of the sun. As they stepped onto the platform, the silver shield on Silas's arm began to glow with a pure, white radiance. The symbols of the sea faded, replaced by stars, moons, and constellations Silas had never seen in any nautical chart. Inside the temple, the walls were covered in celestial murals. These weren't painted. They were etched into the glass and filled with glowing stardust. They told the story of the separation of the realms, a time when the great waters were split from the great winds. "Look here." Silas pointed to a large mural at the center of the hall. It showed a figure, the Sky Queen, holding a crown made of light, while the Sea King held his crown of water. They weren't enemies. They were partners. The balance of the world depends on the connection between the highest point of the sky and the deepest point of the sea. In the center of the temple sat a pedestal made of blue glass. Upon it lay the star map, a complex mechanical device made of gold and crystal. As Silas approached, the map projected a three-dimensional image of the world. He saw the island of fire, the deep blue hole, and the secret harbor. But he also saw a point even higher than the sky reef, the apex, the point where the world's atmosphere touches the void of the stars. That's where the governor is heading. Silas realized. He doesn't just want the Sea King's treasure. He wants the ether engine, the source of the world's wind and tides. If he controls the apex, he controls the weather, the seasons, and the very life of the planet. Suddenly, the floor of the temple shook. Through the clear walls, they saw the iron zenith rising through the ice. The governor had used his alchemical ray to melt the reef, and he was now aiming his cannons directly at the temple. He didn't care about the history or the beauty. He wanted the star map. "We have to take the map and reach the apex first," Silas said, grabbing the device. "But the Sea Serpent can't go any higher. We're at the limit of the favor of the wind." Isabella looked at the murals again, then at the ship. The murals show the Queen's messengers using sails of light. "We don't need wind, Silas. We need the sun." The Sea Serpent was prepared for a transformation. Using the instructions etched into the walls of the glass temple, Isabella and Leo began to modify the ship's rigging. They replaced the heavy canvas sails with thin, translucent sheets of etheric silk found in the temple's treasury. These sails didn't catch the wind. They caught the very rays of the sun. "It's like silver paper," Leo said, carefully lacing the silk to the wooden masts. "I can feel it pulling already. It's like the sun wants to drag us upward." Silas worked at the prow, attaching the star map to the silver shield. The two artifacts locked together with a click of ancient machinery. Immediately, a beam of concentrated solar energy shot from the shield, hitting the new sails. The translucent fabric flared with a brilliant, golden light, and the Sea Serpent began to strain against her dock lines. "Governor Sterling is firing," Marco shouted. The iron zenith unleashed its full broadside. Heavy iron shells slammed into the crystal platform, sending shards of glass flying like daggers. The temple groaned, its light chains flickering under the stress. One shell hit the water barrels on the Sea Serpent, but the crew didn't stop. They knew this was their only chance. "Cast off," Silas yelled. As the ropes were cut, the Sea Serpent didn't drop. She shot upward with a speed that made the crew's stomachs turn. The solar sails were working. They were no longer a ship of the sea or even a ship of the clouds. They were a star chaser. The sky around them turned from indigo to a deep, velvety black. The stars grew larger, and the curve of the earth became visible below them. "The iron zenith is following," Isabella noted, looking through her telescope. The governor's ship was struggling, but it was persistent. Sterling had bypassed his engine's safety limits, and the iron zenith was now trailing a massive plume of black, oily smoke. Its fans were glowing red-hot, but the alchemical power was forcing it higher and higher into the thin air. The governor was willing to melt his own ship to reach the apex. "They can't match our speed, but they have the range," Silas said. "They're aiming the alchemical ray again. They're going to try and burn our sails." The solar sails were powerful, but they were fragile. If the governor's ray touched the etheric silk, it would ignite instantly, leaving them stranded in the vacuum of the upper atmosphere. Silas had to use the ship's agility. He began a series of complex maneuvers, spiraling the ship around the beams of energy like a moth dancing around a flame. "We're entering the thin zone," Silas called out. "The air is almost gone. Everyone, stay close to the pearl." The pearl of navigation began to expand its golden bubble, the same one that had protected them underwater. Inside the bubble, the air stayed fresh and warm, but outside, the universe was cold and silent. They were approaching the apex, a golden ring of light that hung in the void, the heart of the world's energy. The air at the edge of the world was a thin, shimmering veil of indigo. Below, the earth was a vast, curved tapestry of blue and green. But Silas could not afford to admire the view. Behind them, the iron zenith was a dying beast, screaming in mechanical agony. Governor Sterling had pushed his engines into a state of overburn. The massive airship was wreathed in black soot and venting white-hot steam, but it was still gaining. "He's going to ram us," Marco shouted, his voice muffled by the golden pressure bubble. He's lost control of the steering vanes. He's just a falling rock with engines now. Silas gripped the wheel, the pearl of navigation burning a frantic violet. He could see Sterling on the observation deck of the Zenith. The governor's face was twisted, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of his failing alchemical ray. He didn't want the balance. He wanted the power to recreate the world in his image, even if he had to burn it all down to do so. "Isabella, focus the solar sails to the aft," Silas commanded. "We need a burst of speed to clear the docking ring of the apex." The apex was now directly above them, a colossal ring of spinning gold and white marble, thousands of feet wide, suspended in the vacuum. It was the north pole of the sky, the axle upon which the world's winds turned. As the Sea Serpent approached the ring, the star map on the shield began to hum a resonant chord. Suddenly, the iron zenith fired its final shot. The alchemical ray didn't aim for the sails this time. It aimed for the apex itself. Sterling hoped to destabilize the ring, bringing the entire celestial mechanism crashing down so he could scavenge its remains. The beam hit the golden ring, and a shockwave of discordant energy rippled through the air. The apex tilted, its rotation slowing. "He's killing the wind," Leo cried out. Below them, they could see the clouds of the sky reef beginning to dissipate. Without the apex's rotation, the atmosphere would soon become stagnant and lifeless. "We have to board the Zenith," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "We can't fix the apex while Sterling is firing at it. Marco, ready the grappling lines. We're going to show the governor how a sea captain handles a boarding party, even at the edge of space." The Sea Serpent swung around in a wide, elegant arc, the solar sails snapping with the sudden change in direction. As the wooden ship drew alongside the massive, burning airship, the contrast was striking. One was a vessel of light and ancient magic. The other was a monument to industrial madness. With a roar of defiance, Silas's crew threw the lines. The hooks bit into the Zenith's brass railings, and the two ships were locked together in a deadly dance atop the world. Silas was the first over the rail, his boots clattering on the hot brass deck of the iron Zenith. The air was thick with the smell of scorched oil and ozone. Around him, the governor's soldiers were in a state of panic. The ship was shaking so violently that plates were popping off the hull, spiraling down toward the distant earth like falling stars. "To the bridge," Silas yelled, his sword flashing in the harsh light of the unfiltered sun. They fought through a maze of pipes and venting steam. Sterling's men were demoralized. They had seen their leader's madness and knew the ship was doomed. Most dropped their weapons and fled toward the escape gliders. Silas reached the command deck just as the governor was reaching for a master lever, a device designed to purge the ship's entire alchemical core into the apex. "Stop, Sterling," Silas shouted. "You'll shatter the sky. There will be nothing left for you to rule." Sterling turned, his eyes glazed with a terrifying fever. "Rule? You think I care about ruling a bunch of sailors and farmers? I am the architect of the new age. If I cannot have the apex, then no one shall have the wind. The governor lunged, not with a sword, but with an alchemical gauntlet that crackled with orange lightning. Silas met the strike with the silver shield. The collision of ancient sea magic and modern alchemy created a localized explosion of violet sparks. Silas felt the force of it in his marrow. He pushed back, using the star map's gravity-defying energy to knock Sterling off balance. The sea and the sky are not yours to own, Silas said, his voice echoing with the authority of the Sea King and the Sky Queen. Behind them, the apex groaned. The damage from the earlier ray was causing the golden ring to fracture. Massive chunks of marble were breaking away, falling through the atmosphere. Isabella ran to the command console of the Zenith, her fingers flying over the brass dials. Silas, I can reverse the flow. She screamed over the roar of the failing engines. If we channel the Zenith's remaining power through the shield, we can jumpstart the Apex's rotation. But it will destroy this ship. Do it, Silas ordered. He turned back to the governor, but Sterling had already collapsed, his mind broken by the failure of his grand machine. Isabella connected the shield to the Zenith's core. A beam of pure, white energy shot from the ship, striking the center of the golden ring. The apex shuddered, its rotation jerking back to life with a sound like 1,000 church bells ringing at once. The balance was returning, but the iron zenith was at its end. Back to the Sea Serpent. Now, Silas commanded, grabbing Isabella and pulling her toward the grappling lines. They leapt across the void just as the iron zenith vanished in a final, silent bloom of fire and steam. The Sea Serpent drifted in the wake of the explosion, her solar sails shimmering with the reflected light of the reborn apex. The golden ring was spinning once more, faster and smoother than before. The silver light from the star map and the indigo glow of the pearl were now perfectly synchronized. The world below was no longer stagnant. Silas could see the great mist clearing and the tides of the harbor returning to their proper rhythm. We did it, Isabella whispered, leaning against the mast. The sky is safe. But the journey wasn't quite over. As the apex reached its full speed, the center of the ring opened like a flower. From the void of space, a figure descended. Not a ghost, but a being of pure light. This was the Sky Queen, the counterpart to the Sea King. Her robes were made of aurora borealis, and her crown was a constellation of moving stars. She looked at the Sea Serpent, and then at the silver shield. With a graceful movement, she reached out and touched the star map. The device dissolved into a trail of stardust, which flowed into the shield, merging with the sea symbols. The two halves of the world are one again. The Queen's voice was like a flute played in a high mountain valley. The captain of the sea has become the guardian of the horizon. You have proven that the heart of a man is the strongest anchor in the universe. She reached into the air and produced a final gift, the anchor of the stars. It was a small, heavy pendant made of the same dark metal as the abyssal iron, but inlaid with diamonds that glowed with the light of the apex. This will guide you through the transition, she said. The world of the clouds is not for mortals to stay in forever. Go back to your waters, Silas. But know that whenever you look at the stars, we are watching over your sails. The Queen vanished into a burst of light, and the Sea Serpent began its final descent. This wasn't a fall, but a controlled glide. The solar sails folded themselves away, replaced once more by the familiar, sturdy canvas. The ship passed through the sky reef, through the great mist, and finally down toward the blue expanse of the ocean. As they descended, Silas felt a change in the ship. The wood felt stronger, the sails more resilient. The Sea Serpent had been tempered in the fires of the volcano, the pressures of the deep, and the vacuum of the stars. She was now the legendary ship of the three realms. The Sea Serpent touched the water of the hidden harbor with a soft, triumphant splash. The tide was back, higher and clearer than ever before. The villagers, the sailors who had stayed behind, ran to the docks, cheering as the legendary ship glided to its familiar berth. Marco and Leo were the first to jump onto the sand, their faces beaming with the relief of home. Silas stayed on the deck for a moment, his hand on the wheel. The pearl of navigation had returned to its steady, peaceful blue. The silver shield, now enriched with the maps of both the sea and the stars, hung on the bulkhead of his cabin, a silent sentinel of their adventures. The new era. Under Silas's leadership, the harbor became more than just a village. It became the library of the tides. The Academy. Isabella founded a school where the children of the crew learned the secrets of navigation, astronomy, and the preservation of the natural world. The fleet. The favor of the wind was shared with a few chosen ships, creating a fleet of peacekeepers who ensured that no new governors could ever threaten the balance again. The legacy. Silas never forgot his father's map. He realized that the true map was the one they had written with their own courage across the waves and the clouds. The final sunset. Years later, an older Silas sat on the cliffs overlooking the sea. Beside him sat a young girl, his granddaughter, who held a small wooden toy boat. "Will the Sea King ever come back, grandfather?" she asked, looking at the glowing horizon. "He never left, little one," Silas replied, patting the anchor of the stars pendant around his neck. "He is in every wave that hits the shore, and the Sky Queen is in every breeze that fills your hair. They gave us the world to look after, and as long as we remember that, the horizon will always be open." As the sun sank below the water, the stars began to appear. For a brief moment, the indigo of the sea and the indigo of the sky were indistinguishable. The Sea Serpent, resting in the harbor below, let out a faint, bioluminescent glow, as if acknowledging the stars above. Silas stood up, took the girl's hand, and walked back toward the village. The story of the crown, the shield, and the airship would be told for generations. But for Silas, the greatest treasure was the peace of the harbor, the love of his family, and the knowledge that he had fulfilled his destiny. The sea was wide, the sky was infinite, and the journey, the real journey, never truly ends. It just waits for the next brave soul to pick up the map.